Mercenary Mage, Star Mage Saga Book 4, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 23. Atoy had invited Carina to eat dinner with the Mercs, and she was happy to go along. As the days passed aboard the Zenobia and she spent time with her old buddies, reminiscing about assignments they'd carried out and soldiers who had died or retired, her attitude to Merc life had changed. Her old friend and saviour, Captain Speedle, had advised her to get away from it, telling her she wasn't like the others, but that wasn't true. For a time she had been very at home with being a Merc, despite the violence and danger. Perhaps even because of it. Spending years on the streets had accustomed her to a rough and ready way of life. Living among the black dogs again made her realise how domestic and stifling her life with Bryce and the children had become. She loved her little family, but she was too young to be their mother. She felt ill-equipped to provide a childhood for her siblings when she hadn't had much of a one herself. The passenger dining room was too small to accommodate the black dogs who ate aboard the Zenobia after coming off guard duty. The crew's mess on the deck above was used instead. Carina sat with Atoy, Cadwallader and Stevenson around one end of the table. Atoy invited Halliday, Brown and Jackson to sit with them too, for old time's sake. "So the Shearer boy we rescued turned out to be your brother?" Atoy asked, scraping the last of her dinner from her plate. "What a coincidence." She'd been eating yam mash and reconstituted meat. The food was something Carina had never gotten used to in her 2 years as a Merc, though some, like Atoy, seemed to love the slops. Most of the others had finished and were leaving the mess. "Yeah," she replied, "though I didn't find out for a long time." "Cute kid," said Atoy. "I keep telling you," Stevenson said. "It's fate." Carina couldn't tell if he was joking. The pilot didn't seem the type to believe in the supernatural. "Fate or not," said Cadwallader, "that assignment suddenly turned your life upside down, Lin." "Yeah," Atoy said. "From bloodthirsty soldier to mother hen, all in the blink of an eye." She grabbed her drink and downed it all. Jackson slammed down his glass. "I remember Arana now. Shithole of a place. If you hadn't lobbed grenades into the refinery stacks, we would have had it," said Halliday. "Didn't save Carver," Jackson said, staring into his drink. "Or Lee," Atoy added. "Good soldiers," said Cadwallader. "Both of them." "I'll drink to that," Jackson said. "But not this piss. This ship of yours got any beer aboard, Lin? Or are you keeping it all to yourself?" Carina looked at Cadwallader. "In honour of the soldiers who gave their lives to rescue my brother?" she asked. The lieutenant colonel thought a moment, then gave a slight nod. Carina stood up. Atoy and the others cheered. On her way to the passenger-level galley, Carina bumped into Bryce. "Sorry, I can't stop," she said. "I'm on a mission." "The kids missed you at dinner," said Bryce. "They were wondering where you'd gone." "Didn't you get my message?" "Yes, I got your message." "Then why didn't you tell them I was eating with the Mercs?" "I did," Bryce replied, an edge to his tone. "My point is, why didn't you tell them? Why did you leave it to me to explain?" "You mean I should send a note to 6 kids explaining my absence for 1 meal?" She rolled her eyes. "Okay, remind me to do that next time." She tried to step around Bryce, but he moved to block her way. "Is that it?" he asked. "Conversation over?" She put her hands on her hips. "What else is there to discuss? I'm having dinner with some old friends. Since when did I need your permission to do that?" "Old friends?" Bryce sneered. "Let me guess, the pilot's there, right?" "So what if he is? What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong with you, Carina? Ever since those mercenaries came aboard, you've been acting weird. I want to know what's going on." "Acting weird? What kind of weird?" "You've changed. You've gotten tough, short-tempered, dismissive." It's like you're a different person. Even the kids have noticed." "Oh, they have they? I guess you were all discussing me at dinner." "As a matter of fact, we were." "That must have been a lot of fun for you all. Now get out of my way." Bryce stepped to the side. "We were talking about you because we're worried about you," he said as Carina passed. "Because we care," he said to her back. Carina stomped into the passenger galley. How dare they all discuss her like she was a conversation piece, after all she'd done for them? Not one of those ungrateful brats could tell her to her face how much she was disappointing them all. At least they had the excuse they were kids. The same didn't apply to Bryce. His baseless jealousy was making him nutty. She found the beer keg. It was only half empty. It appeared Lomang didn't have much of a taste for the brew, and neither she nor Bryce had been interested in drinking it with the kids around. She filled 2 pitchers and carried them out. By the time she returned to the mess, only Cadwallader, Atoy, Halliday, Stevenson and Jackson remained. It was just as well. If the other mercs had seen the beer, it would have made them envious and caused bad feelings, though doubtless Cadwallader was more than capable of putting any loudmouths in their place. "Now that's a sight for sore eyes," Halliday said. "How long's it been since we had a drink?" He drained his glass and held it out. "Too damned long," said Jackson. "Our CO keeps us on a tight leash, that's for sure." His gaze slid sideways to Cadwallader and he smirked. "Not tight enough, it seems," the leader said, straight-faced as Carina poured his beer. "Only kidding, sir," Jackson said. "Seriously, if I didn't have someone keeping booze out of my hands, I'd be dead by now." "Are you sure you should have some?" Carina asked. "There she goes," said Atoy. She made clucking noises and flapped her elbows. "You channeling Jackson's mom, Car?" "Geez, don't say that," said Jackson, looking genuinely frightened by the idea. "Anyway, my mum's alive, last I heard." "Yeah, she is," Halliday said. "She was telling me she gave up having kids after taking one look at you." Stevenson lifted his beer into the air. "I propose a toast." He waited for everyone to lift their glasses. "Old times." "Old times," they all repeated. Stevenson gave Carina a wink over the edge of his glass as he drank. The conversation split into 2 groups. Atoy, Halliday and Jackson compared their respective parents' disciplinary methods, which included beating them with the back of a spoon, locking them in a cellar, making them clean the bathroom with a toothbrush, forcing them to take ice-cold showers and threatening to let the Regians take them. Meanwhile, Cadwallader, Stevenson and Carina talked about the war between the Sherras and the Dirksons. The 2 men were interested to hear the inside story on what had been going on. "We were approached by the Sherras not long ago," Cadwallader said. "Something about a raid on a moon. I didn't like the sound of it and turned them down." "That would have been Banner's moon. I took part in that. We stole a prototype of the new weapon the Dirksons had developed." "Really?" Stevenson said. "What does it do?" "It sends out a subliminal signal that affects brain function." "What? It impairs motor control?" asked Cadwallader. "No, it affects the emotional state, inducing absolute terror as I understand it. The soldiers were incapable of any action while under its influence." "The soldiers?" Cadwallader said. "So you didn't experience the effects?" "It didn't seem to work on me." Carina shrugged. The conversation was moving in the direction of her magehood and making her uncomfortable. She wished she hadn't mentioned the raid on Banner's moon. She shifted in her seat. "I managed to get away from the Sherras not long after that, bringing my half-brothers and sisters with me." "Did you hear about their flagship, Nightfall?" asked Stevenson. "Hear about it? I was aboard it." "You were?" Stevenson whistled. "That was one big ship." He paused as his gaze focused on something behind Carina's back. He gave a small cough. She turned. Bryce was standing in the doorway, glaring. She was tempted to just ignore him, but Atoy, Halliday and Jackson had noticed his arrival too. Now all her merc friends were looking at her, expecting her to do something. She got up and strode toward him, then past him and out into the corridor. "Do you want something?" "Darius is asking for you. He wants you to tell him a story before he goes to sleep." "Can't you do it?" "He wants you." "He's 7. He doesn't know what he wants. Would it hurt you to say I'll tell him a story tomorrow? And why did you come all the way up here? It's embarrassing for you to come to the door to collect me like you're my dad." "I tried to calm. Your button's off." "No, it—" Oh, she didn't remember turning it off, but she must have at some point. She turned it back on. "I'm going to be here for a while. Tell Darius I promise I'll tell him a story tomorrow. A long one, to make up for missing one tonight." Bryce didn't acknowledge her reply, only looked at her stonily. "I see your pilot friend is here." "Fantastic observation skills you have. Is that it?" "Are you going to spend the night with him?" "What?" "You look like you were pretty close with him just now, and that other guy, Cadwallader. Maybe it's him you're after, not the pilot." Carina stepped close to Bryce and poked him in the chest. "Firstly, Cadwallader isn't into women. Secondly, what the hell are you on? Have you been trying out the potions in Lomang's pharmacy in the hold? What makes you think I won't be coming back to our cabin tonight? I'm with you, aren't I?" "I don't know. Are you?" "Stars. If you have to ask, maybe we shouldn't be together. Maybe we aren't right for each other after all. I'm seeing a side of you I never saw before."
"Ditto."
Bryce gave her a sullen look and then walked away. She returned to the mess, where the conversation had resumed in her absence. She tried to regain the spirit of the evening, but she felt drained. Maybe reconnecting with the black dogs had changed her a little, bringing out aspects of her personality that hadn't shown while she was with Bryce and the kids. But so what? It was no excuse for Bryce to turn into a caricature of a jealous boyfriend. She wasn't going to apologize for having a romantic past that didn't include him, and she'd done nothing to justify his suspicions. She sipped her beer and brooded as the others talked. Chapter 24.
"So you really want to attack probably the most heavily defended place on all Ostalon?"
Cadwallader asked, rubbing his jaw. He and Carina were looking at a hollow of the world. The globe turned as they watched it. "We don't have to attack, but I do want to get inside."
"And once you're inside?"
"I want to search it. I think there may be information there that's useful to me."
"From what I understand, the place is very large. Searching it thoroughly will take a long time, and it doesn't sound like you know exactly what you're looking for."
Carina didn't have a good answer for the lieutenant colonel. She reached out and stopped the globe. "According to what my brother remembers, the Dirksen headquarters must be somewhere in this mountain range." She pointed at the place in the landscape. "He says he'll recognize the route if he goes there again."
"So we have to approach during daylight,"
said Cadwallader. His expression was doubtful. She hoped he wasn't going to back out. The protocol for accepting work had changed since she'd left the Black Dogs. No more suicide missions, no matter what the payment. Her history with the band wouldn't have any influence. If Cadwallader thought the assignment was too dangerous, he would refuse it, and the men and women would follow his decision regardless of any friendship with her. "We won't be relying entirely on your support. Don't forget we have unusual capabilities ourselves."
Yes. Your special powers."
His tone was skeptical. They were alone in the mission room. She looked around for something she could use for a demonstration. She didn't like the idea of casting just to prove a point, but she needed Cadwallader to believe her if they were to factor the mage's abilities into their planning. As her gaze roved the room, a lump suddenly came to her throat and her vision blurred.
"Something wrong, Carina?"
He'd never called her by her first name before. It made her feel worse. She rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. The last person I had this conversation with was Captain Speedle.
You told John about these powers too?
Cadwallader's usually deadpan expression broke. He looked taken aback. I made him swear never to tell anyone. I said my life depended on it. She'd guessed that Cadwallader and Speedle might have been more than fellow officers. She swallowed and continued. It was how I knew exactly where Darius was when we went to rescue him. I had the tracker the Dirksons had cut out of him. I used it to cast Locate, but I had to tell Speedle how I knew the location of the child, or he would never have authorized the mission.
I remember. He was hazy about the intel, which wasn't like him. I trusted that he knew what he was doing.
Carina hung her head. I'm so sorry he died. A silence followed, an informal moment of remembrance.
John was no fool.
Cadwallader sighed and then appeared to draw himself together.
I'm prepared to be impressed. When you're ready, Lin.
He spoke briskly. The wall was up again. She had seen an interface screen she could transport, but then she had an idea for something more impressive. It would make Cadwallader realize how useful the Mage children could be during the infiltration of the mountain castle. She calmed Darius. Hi, Carina. Could you come to the mission room? Sure. I want to show you something special, Carina said to Cadwallader. You might be surprised to hear it, but Darius is the most powerful mage among us, probably the most powerful mage in this sector.
Darius is the little boy who was kidnapped?
That's right.
That is surprising. So this ability has nothing to do with age or training?
It does require training, but basically you're born a mage or not. My youngest sister, Nala, has no ability at all. Most of the rest of them are like me. We needed to learn and practice our skills. Darius is naturally gifted. He can even invent his own casts, something I'd never even heard of. I guess this is a good time to tell you about Castiel too. For a long time everyone thought he was like Nala, entirely without any mage powers. But when he hit puberty his ability suddenly developed. It was a bad sign. I don't know a lot about it, but from what I understand that usually happens if the person is a dark mage.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. For a long time, Castiel has lived up to the image. He's done some terrible things. Now he says he's come over to our side and wants to be a part of the family again, but I don't believe him. It's pure expediency to get what he wants.
And what's that?
I honestly don't know. All I know is we mustn't ever trust him. He could turn on us at any minute. Of all the kids, he's the most like his father, and his father was a monster.
Okay, noted.
Cadwallader turned his attention to the mountain range on the hollow of Ostalon. A few moments later, Darius arrived. Hey, Carina, he said, as the mission room door drew back. He ran up to her and gave her a hug, though it had been only a couple of hours since they'd seen each other at breakfast. Hey, sweetie. Could you show Lieutenant Colonel one of your casts? Okay. Which one do you want me to do? I was wondering if you could cast Guys again. Of course I can. Who should I cast it on? You? I thought maybe you could do it on him. Cadwallader looked concerned.
What does this entail exactly?
You don't have to do anything. And don't worry, it won't hurt.
I hadn't imagined it might hurt till you said that.
Cadwallader seemed to be joking. Darius was studying the man carefully. He wasn't as familiar with the Mercs as he was with Bryce, Carina supposed. So he needed time to take in his appearance. It was something worth remembering if she wanted Darius to impersonate someone during the attempt to infiltrate the Dirksen headquarters. Her little brother took his elixir canister from his belt and drank some of the liquid.
I wondered why you all carried those flasks.
Darius's eyes closed. Then he became Cadwallader. The real one swore and stepped backward, stumbling over his own feet. He turned so white, Carina thought he might faint or vomit. "It's only an illusion, nothing more." Cadwallader tried to regain some composure, straightening his jacket, but he continued to stare at Darius Cadwallader. Carina wondered if she'd gone too far. She hadn't intended to frighten the officer. She'd forgotten he'd never seen the simplest cast before, let alone one of Darius's off-the-wall extravaganzas.
"Remarkable,"
Cadwallader said finally.
"I presume he can change back. Having two of us around might be confusing."
"Casts are temporary. He can't change back at will, or I think you can't, can you, Darius?" The copy of Cadwallader shook his head. "But the cast will fade soon, and then he'll be back to normal."
"I can't deny it's extremely convincing. Can I touch you, Darius?"
"Sure, I don't mind." The merc approached Darius, reaching out a hand. He touched his chest, and his hand disappeared.
"There's nothing there. I can't feel a thing."
His tone was wondrous. His arm moved downward. "That's my head," Darius exclaimed. Cadwallader chuckled.
"Extraordinary."
He turned to Carina, withdrawing his arm from his fake twin.
"He appears to be altering light somehow, creating an illusion."
"It seems to be a fundamental law of casting that we can't create something from nothing. We can only alter or move what's already there."
"Is this what helped you to be a good soldier?"
"No, I hardly ever cast while I was on duty. It was too dangerous for me. I didn't want to get found out. Once people know what you can do, it just brings a whole world of trouble, believe me. That's why I'd appreciate it if you and the rest of the black dogs never tell anyone else about us." Cadwallader nodded. She was relieved she didn't have to go to the effort of trying to convince him of the truth of her words.
"You understand I can't guarantee that, however. Soldiers get injured and retire, or they simply leave. I can't police what they do when they're no longer under my authority."
"I know. If I find what I need on Ostalon, me and my family will hopefully be far away before word gets out." Suddenly Cadwallader's mouth dropped open.
"The defense of the embassy! The enemy soldiers disappearing! That was real! It was you!"
"I didn't have a choice. We would have all died if I hadn't done something."
"Huh! I didn't believe it for a minute. I thought it was battle stress making the troops hallucinate."
"We were stressed, but it was real." The second Cadwallader disappeared, and Darius stood in his place, looking pleased with himself. The original squatted to get down to his eye level and ruffled the boy's dark brown mop of hair.
"You're a smart boy, aren't you? Your sister's proud of you. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. And so she should be. You're going to be a big help when we pay the Dirksons a visit."
Cadwallader stood up.
"It's time your siblings received some basic training if you intend for them to take part in this mission. They'll need weapons as well as their powers if they're to defend themselves against armed soldiers, unless you have a caste that stops pulse fire."
"No, not even Darius can do that, but I've already given my siblings some weapons training, and Bryce went through basic with the Shurers."
"Good. Then all we need to do is get them working as a team with the troops."
"I didn't think that would be necessary."
"You didn't? Then what was your plan? You haven't detailed anything."
She sighed. "That's because I don't have one."
"The powers you and your family possess are impressive, but they aren't sufficient. You need more than that to get inside the Dirksons' mountain castle and keep you safe while you search it. Otherwise you wouldn't be paying for our services. I've noticed you seem to be going to some effort to keep your siblings and the black dogs apart. But the only way you're going to succeed in your endeavour is if both parties work together."
That's what I was afraid of. Chapter 25. Telling the black dogs about the Mage's abilities had been unavoidable. Carina had realised that before she made contact with them. Working in proximity, it was inevitable that the mercs would see the mage's casting. She had gotten the information out in the open right from the start, but the act had weighed heavily on her. Nine-Eye had conditioned her to deeply fear exposure, and for good reason. The old woman had lost her son and daughter-in-law to a trap laid by Stefan Scherer. Carina had decided the risk was worth it if it meant they could discover the information they needed to find Earth. If they had that, they could leave the sector forever, hopefully before the mercs could turn on them. It was the period between the telling and the leaving that worried her. Bryce had shown her that not all non-mages were out to exploit and enslave her, and she trusted certain members of the Black Dogs, like Stevenson, Cadwallader and Atoy. However, to many of them she was nothing more than an ex-merc. They had no history with her, no comradeship or sense of obligation. She couldn't predict what they might do once they had thought through the possibilities. Others, like Chandu, she didn't trust at all. It wasn't only Bryce's concern about Parthenia's vulnerability that had motivated Carina to keep her siblings away from the mercs. It was also a fear of familiarity between the two groups. She didn't want her brothers or sisters to feel comfortable and relax their guard around the military men and women. But Cadwallader's logic was faultless. She couldn't expect to get into the Dirksen headquarters without a coordinated plan including mages and mercs. They would have to try out plans and rehearse the steps together. The problem was they had nowhere to practice. Neither the Duchess nor the Zenobia had facilities for military training. When she'd been with the Black Dogs, they had trained in uninhabited regions of sparsely populated planets. But as far as she knew, no such places existed between them and Ostalon, and she didn't want to waste time with a diversion. Each day that passed ate into the value of the goods in the hold. Several days after their first discussion about the assignment, Cadwallader asked her to join him again in the mission room. "I asked Stevenson to keep an eye on the scan data for a place we could use for a rehearsal," he said as she entered. "He found this." Ostalon had been replaced on the holo display by another world she didn't recognize. "We're 3 cycles out from it. With the opportunity to train it allows, the diversion will be worth the extra time, I believe." "I don't think it's safe to set down on an inhabited planet. I don't want to take the risk." "It isn't inhabited. It's a rogue planet." "No kidding." She stepped closer to the spinning sphere. "What liquid is making up those oceans?" "It's water. Geothermal energy is keeping the place above 0 degrees. It even has a magnetosphere, and it's retained a hydrogen and helium atmosphere. We would have to adapt some EVA suits for the children." "You can't cast in an EVA suit," Carina said, tapping her elixir canister. "I don't see why not. A water supply can be fitted inside for long assignments. That stuff you drink is just another liquid." Good point. I guess I'd never thought about it. What's the planet's gravity?" "That's the catch. It's 1.6 standard." She grimaced. The children were entirely unused to moving about while weighing more than 50% heavier, and the argument that training in high grav made you fitter for fighting at lower gravities didn't apply in this situation. You didn't need to be fit to cast. "The troops have to rehearse somewhere," said Cadwallader. "They've never worked with mages before, and probably won't ever again, though that's beside the point. You know the drill. It's usually us versus combatants. But this time around there's going to be a bunch of kids performing magic tricks, getting in the way most likely, and strange stuff will be happening that's going to throw the soldiers off their game. They need to know what to expect. And do you want your brothers and sisters to be around a firefight without any idea what's going on? I don't need to tell you how dangerous that is. It isn't only the Black Dogs who need these rehearsals, it's the mages too." I know. She took a breath. "Okay, we're 3 days out, you say? That should be enough time to modify some suits.
Right. I suggest this area for the rehearsal.
Cadwallader pointed to a mountainous area on one of the globe's continents. The data indicated there should be plenty of caves.
Maybe we can find a cavern to represent the mountain castle.
The younger children became alive with excitement when they heard the news. "Do we get to fire weapons?" Oriana asked, her eyes shining. "Probably not," replied Carina. "Your role is to cast, remember?" Oriana's mouth turned down into a pout. "But we will be armed, right?" "Yes, you'll be armed because you'll be armed for the real thing, since you need a weapon to defend yourself. But the aim of the exercise is to practice working with the mercs. They're the ones who'll be doing most of the shooting." "Cool!" Fern exclaimed. "Am I coming too?" Nala asked. There was an awkward pause. Nala couldn't cast, and as a child she certainly couldn't fight. There was nothing she could do except get in the way. And while the last thing Carina wanted to do was to hurt her little sister's feelings, she couldn't afford to spare them when her presence could put others at risk. "Not this time, but when you're a bit bigger, I'll teach you everything I know about fighting." Sweet-natured Nala seemed satisfied with this response. Then Castiel said, "You can't join in because you aren't good enough. You'll just get in the way." Nala's eyes grew shiny and her chin trembled. "Castiel," said Carina through clenched teeth. "I swear, one more comment like that and you'll be back in the brig, sharing a cell with that mutant in Lomang's crew. I bet he hasn't forgotten how you betrayed them. You wouldn't dare. You need me." "No, we don't," said Parthenia. "We can manage perfectly well without you." "Try me," Carina added. "Have you ever known me not to follow through on a threat?" Castiel glared at her, but he said nothing.
"So what's the plan?" Bryce asked.
Things between them had been at a stalemate since their most recent spat. They were civil, but nothing more. She didn't know if Bryce had stopped bothering her because he'd realized he was being an idiot, or because he'd decided he didn't want to be with her and was waiting for a good moment to break up. She still felt the same about him and would be heartbroken if he wanted to split up, but she knew she'd done nothing wrong and had nothing to apologize for. If anyone needed to apologize, it was him, for his unfounded, ridiculous and shaming accusations, and for embarrassing her in front of her friends. "I'm still working on the details with Cadwallader," Carina replied. "When it comes to the actual mission, we decided the best approach is to fly the shuttle into the range during daylight so Castiel can direct us to the hidden entrance. Darius will cloak the shuttle so we won't be seen." "Yes!" the little boy interjected, punching the air. "After Stevenson drops us off, he'll return to the ship. It's unlikely there's going to be anywhere to set down out there, and even if there was, we wouldn't be able to hide the evidence that a vessel had landed. Then we'll wait until dark to approach the castle. But for the rehearsals, we don't have to worry about most of that, only the approach over mountain terrain. What we'll be practicing is infiltrating the castle, taking out the guards, and searching the place for information about mages." "Do you think they will have left anything behind for us to find?" Parthenia asked. "I mean, why would they?" "I agree, it's possible there's nothing there. If so, we're back to square one. But there's still the religious artifacts. They might hold some clues. Maybe we can steal the originals and see if we can glean some information that way." "I thought mages weren't supposed to steal," Darius asked.
"Huh," Castiel said. "Carina's stolen the Zenobia's entire hold of contraband. How do you think she's paying the black dogs?"
"Is that true, Carina?" Darius asked, his large deep brown eyes wide and fixed on her. She couldn't deny it. Castiel was smirking as he waited for her to answer. We are giving the things Lomang was smuggling to the black dogs, but they're things that should have never been bought or sold anyway. And Lomang was going to enslave us.
And what about the religious artifacts? Castiel asked, folding his arms. I'm sure they have deep spiritual significance to the people of Ostalon. Yeah, people who invaded an occupied planet and drove the mages into hiding, said Bryce.
Carina said, Darius, I don't have a good reason to justify what we're doing. 2 wrongs don't make a right. And if we weren't in the position we're in, I wouldn't even contemplate what I'm proposing. But mages have been pushed into a corner for no fault of their own, just for living their lives the best way they can. It's long past the time we made a stand and took back what should be ours, the right to live free of the fear of persecution and enslavement. And if I have to break a few rules to achieve that, so be it.
I don't mind breaking any rules, said Fern. Oriana punched his shoulder.
Chapter 26. Carina lowered Darius's visor and stepped back. Her brother looked incredibly cute in his little Eva suit. They were in the Duchess's shuttle bay with the other mages, gearing up for the rehearsal. Take a small sip of elixir to check the feed is working, she said.
I can hear you inside my helmet.
Yes, we'll all be able to hear each other when the rehearsal starts, so you have to be careful not to talk unless it's about something important. If you want to talk to anyone one-on-one, you have to give a voice command. Don't worry about that for now. Just try to sip some elixir. He closed his lips around the end of the straw that protruded near his mouth, then gave her a thumbs up. The other kids had finished putting on their suits. All the weapons are in training mode. Don't adjust the settings or you could hurt someone. If you get hit, an alarm will sound, once for a non-lethal injury and twice for a fatal wound, though in reality any hit would probably be lethal because it would breach your suit and you'd suffocate.
Now then, Carina, Bryce said dryly, don't candy coat it just because they're kids. Tell it like it really is.
If you receive a non-lethal hit, she said, ignoring him, you can move for, let's say, 3 minutes, slowly. If you hear the alarm sound twice, lie down. You're dead.
I'm gonna shoot you all,
Castiel said, moving to draw his pulse gun from its holster under his arm. She was on him in a flash. She snatched the weapon from his hand.
No gun for you this time around. Hey, I was only kidding.
She leaned into the boy so their visors were touching.
You never play around with weapons. Not ever. I don't care if you're still a kid. These are not toys. And if you can't understand that basic fact, you stay behind when we go to Ostalon. Maybe you stay behind forever. I won't let you leave me there. I won't allow it. I'll take Nala again. That's it. Take off your suit. You're going back to the Zenobia. No, I didn't mean it. Honestly, I didn't. You're done. You had your chance and you messed up. This rehearsal is too important to waste any more time on your nonsense. Go back to the ship. Please, I'm sorry. I promise I won't do anything else. I don't even want the gun back. I know I was stupid, and I'm sorry. No.
She turned to the other siblings. The rest of you get in the shuttle. The mercs will be along in a minute. Castiel's shoulders sagged. He looked regretful and forlorn, but she didn't believe he was sincere. Even if the boy really had decided to reform, he clearly remained full of bitterness and spite. She wasn't confident he could ever overcome it, and she wasn't going to sacrifice the other kid's safety to make him feel better about himself.
Maybe you should let him come, Parthenia said. He did apologize.
Yeah, said Fern.
He was only messing around. I'd hate to be left behind. Nala's coming along even though she won't be taking part.
Nala was going to remain on the shuttle with Stevenson while the rest of them carried out the rehearsal. Fern's input surprised Carina. Of all the siblings, he seemed to dislike Castiel the most. "What do you think, Bryce?" she asked. He shrugged. "Up to you." Thanks for the support, she thought. "Okay, Castiel, you can come, but step 1 foot out of line and you're going straight back to the shuttle." Castiel mumbled something that sounded like thanks, and for once his tone wasn't sarcastic. She still didn't trust him. The ride down to the unnamed, uncharted rogue planet brought back memories of her Merc days. The bare metal interior and cramped confines of the shuttle's cabin were exactly as she remembered. Their EVA suits supplied their air, so she couldn't smell the cabin, but the place probably stank. There was no real reason for cleaning it. After leaving the Duchess's Agrav, they all bobbed against their harnesses, 2 long rows of mercs and mages facing each other, no one speaking. Cadwallader sat in the place Captain Speedle had occupied on many of their shorter missions. She recalled Smits chewing that foul herb he loved so much, and her trying to avoid the gobs of spit he would send out, and that time he'd tried to take her elixir, thinking it was water. She also recalled the merc bodies they had stowed in the well between the facing rows, as they took them back to the Duchess for formal burial. The rogue planet's gravitational force increased, and everyone sank into the benches. She had warned the children they would feel much heavier while they were on the planet. Would they be able to cope? Perhaps not, after the initial novelty wore off. The shuttle dropped, causing some of the kids to scream, though they sounded more excited than scared. She mentally sighed. The rehearsal wasn't supposed to be a fun exercise. She didn't know how to make her siblings appreciate the real danger they would be facing when they attempted to penetrate the Dirksen defences on Ostalon. The shuttle dropped again, then juddered. "Just a little turbulence," Stevenson said over the comm. "Nothing to worry about." He'd suggested that Nala ride up front with him in the co-pilot's seat. Carina doubted anyone had ever shown the little girl so much attention. She was probably having the time of her life. As they drew closer to the gravity well of their destination, everyone settled down on their benches. It wouldn't be long until they landed, then the enemy would take their positions. Half the mercs taking part in the rehearsal wore bands that designated them as Dirksen troops, and they would be identified as such on the visor HUDs. Carina and the other mages were playing themselves, and Bryce would be fighting alongside the friendly mercs. The aim was to attempt to enter a cavern the enemy mercs would defend, using dummy arms fire and casting. After discussion with Cadwallader, she had suggested casts the mages might use, primarily transport, fire as a diversionary tactic, and enthrall. She had contemplated using Darius's new Guise cast, but he was the only one who could do it, and he didn't know exactly when it would fade. She wanted to avoid exposing the little boy to excessive risk. She was uncomfortable enough with taking him along, but she also knew his powers would be invaluable in a crisis. Cadwallader had asked the inevitable question, could mages kill? "A gun is faster," she had replied. It was her standard non-committal response. She wasn't about to ask her siblings to kill anyone. If they had to, under threat of losing their own life, they knew how. After seeing their father die, they didn't need reminding of the appropriate cast. Cadwallader hadn't pushed the issue. "Touchdown in 3 minutes," said Stevenson. The gravitational pull had been steadily increasing as they descended. The mercs didn't remark on it, as they were used to non-standard gravities.
"I'm getting squashed,"
Darius exclaimed. He lifted an arm.
"My arm is heavy."
"It's going to be harder for you all to move around," she reminded the kids. "If it gets to be too much, let me know, then go back to the shuttle and rest. I don't want you to fall down or have some other kind of accident while we're here. The EVA suits are tough, but they aren't impregnable." A short while later, the shuttle gave a brief shudder as it landed. The exit portal swung up.
I didn't think it would be dark,
Oriana said. The landscape outside was nearly indiscernible. Black humps stood out against the brilliant stars of the background. What did you expect? Fern asked. There's no sun. Your helmet lights will come on when you step outside, Carina said. It's better this way. Our attempt to enter the Dirksen Mountain Castle will take place at night too.
Let's go!
Darius unfastened his safety harness. Wait, our enemies have to take their positions. Cadwallader had already ordered the mercs who were playing the adversaries to exit the vessel. The friendly team left next. Finally, it was the mage's turn to walk down the ramp. She followed the kids, her HUD displaying a rapidly dropping temperature and adjusting atmospheric gas levels. The temperature stabilized at 1 degree C. The atmosphere was composed almost entirely of hydrogen. Like a line of extremely disciplined fireflies, the lights of the enemy mercs were already departing across the landscape. Cadwallader was going with them. Atoy was to be the CO for the friendly mercs. The imbalance in experience between the two commanding officers was probably deliberate on Cadwallader's part. He wanted to make the task as difficult for the attackers as possible. With the mage's scant exposure to combat, that wouldn't be hard. Chapter 27. Atoy was leading them toward a high ridge overlooking the cavern entrance, probably guessing that Cadwallader would have posted lookouts along the easiest, most obvious routes. To avoid detection by the enemy, she'd ordered them to turn off their helmet lights, so they were travelling on night vision. Starlight glimmered brightly on their EVA suits and visors. Ahead of Carina, a line of figures snaked across the dull black mountainside. She was bringing up the rear, last of the mages. They'd been going for half an hour or so, and she was breathing heavily in the 1.6 G. She hadn't realised she'd gotten so out of shape. All the mages were beginning to lag behind the mercs. She opened a channel to only her siblings. "Hurry up! This is a team effort, remember? Don't let your fellow soldiers down." Oriana was the only one to reply.
I'm so heavy. I'm never eating flannock fish cakes again.
"You don't even like flannock fish cakes," said Fern. The aim of the rehearsal was to penetrate all the enemy's defences. As a practice for the real thing, it was barely adequate, but they didn't know what they would be looking for or where to find it if they did manage to get inside the mountain castle, so they had to improvise as best they could. At least the mages would have the opportunity to become accustomed to operating in a battle situation. "Halt," said Atoy. They had to be near the cavern. Carina peered over the edge of the ledge, but at first all she could see was the rough side of the mountain. Then a ragged mouth seemed to open in the mountain's face. Two figures stood just inside the entrance, easy targets. "Captain, do you want the mages to take those guards out?" Carina asked. "You read my mind, and if you can do it without alerting any of the others, the kids get to play with Jackson's prosthesis." "Hey!" came Jackson's protest over the comm. "I'll do it!" yelled Fern. "Shh!" said Carina. "Wait for the order. Do you see who we mean?" "Uh-huh," Fern replied. "I'll enthrall the one on the left, and Oriana can do the other." A few moments later he said, "Done." "Mine too," said Oriana. "Is that it?" Atoy asked. "They don't look any different." "That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Carina asked. "When they see us appear, they won't react, and they'll do whatever you tell them for the next 10 minutes to an hour. I guess we have to trust you. Okay, troops, rappel down to the entrance and storm the place. Kill those two at the entrance first."
"Kill them?"
said Parthenia in a horrified tone.
"But they aren't dangerous now they're enthralled."
"They aren't dangerous yet," Atoy corrected. "You don't need to rappel down," Carina said. "I can cast to move you all faster. Just tell me where." "Oh, okay." She related the positions she wanted the troops, which were basically just out of sight of the entrance. Carina had moved more soldiers and further at the disastrous defence of the embassy. This time they were all in sight, which made the task easier. "Right, get ready," she told them. "And don't panic. I don't want you falling over when you hit the ground in this high G and breaking a leg." She sucked elixir through her helmet tube and sent out the cast. Exclamations of surprise and colourful cursing came over the comm as the mercs found themselves floating through the atmosphere and down the cliff face. The children giggled. Carina set them down gently. "Now it's our turn," she said to the kids. As the merc set off at a run toward the cavern entrance, she and the children lowered themselves to the spot the mercs had just left. "Come on," she said as soon as they'd landed. "Let's go."
"I can't run,"
Oriana complained.
"I can barely walk."
Despite her complaints, the young girl picked up her pace. Up ahead, the battle's pulse fire flashed.
"It would make more sense for us to lead the attack,"
Parthenia puffed.
"If we enthralled or transported everyone we saw, no one would get hurt."
"Don't be stupid," said Castiel. "They're soldiers. They're paid to die." "All of you be quiet," Carina barked.
"We go in second this time. That's the plan." They would try it the other way around next time, with additional strategies from Cadwallader to rehearse. Atoy commed the cavern entrance was clear. "Darius, behind me," Carina directed. "The rest of you flank me, as I told you earlier." Every mage except Darius carried a weapon. She didn't trust any 7-year-old not to shoot someone or themselves by accident. And though all the weapons were set to practice mode, she didn't want Darius to become accustomed to having one. She would protect him, with her life if necessary. Parthenia and Castiel took up the 2 positions farthest from her, and Oriana and Fern walked nearest. The ability to sip elixir and keep their hands free was an advantage that Carina had never appreciated before. But then mages usually had no cause to be toting a gun and casting simultaneously. The 2 guards Oriana and Fern had enthralled were sitting outside the entrance, killed by Atoy's troops. As they walked inside, Carina saw 2 more pairs of boots behind rocks, which her HUD also marked as dead. Cadwallader's battle strategy didn't seem to be working too well, but there was more to what he was doing than met the eye. Flashes from the opening at the back of the cavern spoke of a second encounter. Atoy's advance had met resistance. "Slow down," Carina said, as the mages approached the rear of the cave. She commed Atoy for an update. It was several moments before her old friend replied, "Shit, Car, it's not good. They've got us pinned down. Cadwallader laid an ambush, the son of a bitch." The fizz and hiss of pulse fire sounded over the comm. "Roger," Carina said. "Coming in." "No, wait there. We don't need rescuing by a bunch of kids." "We can help." "Negative. I repeat, negative. Do not advance. The area is not secure." "Yeah," said Carina. "I'm not a black dog anymore." She closed the comm and opened another to the mages. "We need to go in and rescue our troops."
"Yes!"
Oriana exclaimed.
"Let's do it!"
The 6 mages walked through the aperture at the back of the cave, where the floor sloped sharply downward. Carina went first into the gap. She crouched down and signaled to the others to do the same. They advanced more slowly. The Eva suits gave out next to no heat, and here, where the natural light levels were very low, they would reflect little light for the night vision to pick up. The enemy troops, and they themselves, would be hard to see. Though there was little natural light, occasional bursts of pulse fire had radiated up the... She'd seen something! For an instant the flash of a pulse in the distance had bounced off a small domed surface just beyond a rocky protrusion. The dome was too smooth and regular to be natural. It had to be the helmet of a merc Cadwallader had stationed there. She lifted her weapon to her shoulder. She could cast Enthrall in the vicinity she'd seen the helmet, but without a clear line of sight, she wouldn't be completely confident it would work, and the only way to find out would be to expose one of them to an attack. She aimed in roughly the right direction and waited. Another flash came. She fired. Had she hit the merc? "Why are you shooting?" asked Castiel. "We're the mages. We should be casting." Ignoring him, she said, "I'm going forward. Stay back until I tell you it's okay to join me. If I get killed, retreat." Maintaining her crouch, she went deeper into the tunnel. Behind the protrusion, she found the merc she'd shot. He gave a wave. She calmed the mages. "Okay, advance." Cadwallader's response to the signal from the Eversuit of the downed merc was immediate. Troops came running up the tunnel to meet them. She shot one but missed the other, who carried on firing. "I'm wounded," yelled Fern. Suddenly the remaining merc stopped dead and dropped her weapon. "I enthralled her," Parthenia said. "So did I," said Oriana. "And me," Castiel added. The poor soldier had been hit with 3 enthrall casts at once. Carina gently moved her to the side of the tunnel and made a mental note to make sure she would be guided back to the shuttle and not left behind. She would probably be out for a while. 5 of their enemy lay dead behind them, 1 in front, and 1 more had been incapacitated. Cadwallader was getting low on troops. He probably had barely enough to keep Atoy's group locked down. He wouldn't have received a signal from the enthralled merc's suit. Physically, she was absolutely fine, and no pulse rounds had hit her as far as Carina knew. Cadwallader might think the tunnel remained defended. The mages continued to slowly walk down the pitch-dark tunnel. Even with night vision, it was hard to distinguish the way ahead. The craggy walls were drawing in, and soon they were down to single file, with her in front. A stony dead end confronted them, but the flashes from the battle ahead revealed a crack in the wall to the right. She told the others to halt. She approached the crack and peeked in. Another blank wall of stone stood only a meter or so away. From the intensity of the flashes, the battle seemed to be going on just beyond it, around a sharp turn. As soon as the mages emerged from the second turn, they would be revealed. Yet if they were to be of any use to Atoy's team, they had to see the opposing troops. She wished there was a cast for seeing around corners. She would have to ask Darius if he could invent it. For now, however, there appeared to be only one course of action. She quickly explained her plan to the mages. "Stick to my behind like glue," she said to Darius, who giggled. "Ready?" 5 helmets nodded. "Go!" She ran into the gap and turned hard right. A wider space opened up. She ran into it, firing. Cadwallader's troops ranged around the edges, focused on a spot in the corner. She got off 4 or 5 rounds before any of the enemy knew what was happening. She wasn't sure how many she'd hit. They were turning, but there was no cover, except in the corner where Atoy's team had to be. She ran toward it, continuing to fire. Wounded right leg appeared on her HUD. The dark space was lit with flashes. She didn't have time to look back at what the kids were doing. Enemy troops in front of her were freezing. Others disappeared entirely. She was at the corner, running between a gap in the low rocks. More enemy mercs appeared from the other side. Atoy's team fired on them. "Where's Darius?" She found her brother beside her, eyes closed. 2 more mages made it to the corner. 2 lay on the cavern floor. "Cease fire!" came Cadwallader's command. Next to her, a mage raised their weapon. She recognized Oriana. Reaching out, she pushed her sister's muzzle down. The mercs who had been pinned down relaxed. The enemy soldiers were all either dead, wounded, not responding because they were enthralled, or simply gone. Atoy stood up. "Shit, Car, I thought I told you to stay back." "What did you expect me to do? Leave you all to die?"
I expected you to follow orders. If we don't work as a team, we'll fail. Why do I even have to remind you of that? And they're kids."
She pointed to the 2 mages who had been fatalities.
"We don't expect them to die for us."
Fern and Parthenia were rising to their feet. "They have to learn it's a real risk," said Carina. "They have to learn caution, and maybe we have to work on some better tactics. That's the point of the rehearsal." A heavy hand clapped her on her shoulder.
"Lin, Atoy," said Cadwallader, "debriefing back on the Duchess."
One of Atoy's team pushed roughly past Carina and stomped away. Her HUD told her it was Bryce. Chapter 28. As Carina got ready for bed, Bryce was cold and silent. He'd said very little since the rehearsal, and even then it had been mostly to the kids. Predictably, Darius was quiet too, picking up on Bryce's mood. She decided to try to break the tension while the little boy was showering, if only for her brother's sake. There wasn't a lot she could do about him being a sponge for the emotions of those around him, but what she could do, she would. "What's up with you, Bryce?" she asked, in as neutral a tone as she could manage. He'd been a pain in the ass lately with his irrational jealousy. The future she'd imagined for them both was looking increasingly hazy. She found it hard to be around him without feeling resentful and angry. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, facing away from her, resting his elbows on his knees. He turned his head, and the look on his face cooled the fire of her annoyance like the fall rain cooled the heat of summer on her home world. He wasn't pissed at her. He was sad.
"Where did Carina go? 'Cause I don't know who the hell you are."
"What do you mean?" He didn't answer, only stood up and pulled his shirt off over his head. "Bryce, answer me. What do you mean you don't know who I am? I'm the same person I've always been. If anyone's changed, it's you." He walked into the closet. "Damn it, don't walk away from me when I'm trying to talk to you."
"Stars, I'm getting a clean shirt."
He walked out into the bedroom.
"This is exactly what I mean. What's wrong with you? Ever since those mercs came aboard, you've been cranky and distant. It's like you're drawing away from me and the kids."
"Not this again. I can't help it that I knew some of the black dogs before I met you. And yes, some of them are men. And yes, I do have a history, as you like to put it, that doesn't include you. Just like you have a history that doesn't include me. If you want us to stay together, you're going to have to get over it. I'm not going to act like a stranger to people I know and like, just to spare your overly sensitive feelings."
"I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way you act, the way you treat the kids. You don't spend time with them like you used to, and—"
"In case you haven't noticed, I'm trying to plan a raid on the headquarters of one of the most dangerous clans in the sector."
"And when you do talk to them, it's like you don't care about them."
"What? Of course I care about them. You know what I've been through, the risks I've taken to save them and protect them." His remark had hit her core. Angry tears threatened, but she swallowed them down, refusing to show any weakness.
"That was in the past. Things are different now. Sure, Darius still has your attention, but the others don't. Look at what happened today. You acted like your brothers and sisters were mercs. They aren't. They're just kids, and spoilt, rich kids at that."
"I realize that. That's why I've been trying to keep them and the mercs apart. But if we're to stand a chance of getting into the mountain castle—"
"Parthenia and Fern died. It was a rehearsal for the real thing. Is the information you want worth sacrificing those kids' lives for?"
"Do you have any kind of idea what their lives will be like if we don't get out of this sector? If I don't find them somewhere safe to live, they'll end up like Ma, or like me, in the gutter, and then killing for a living."
Oh, please don't try to tell me how hard you had it. You're forgetting what my life was like when we met, when I didn't know if the next day would be my last. Remember who you're talking to, Carina. But I don't go bellyaching about it.
You're not a mage. No one is hunting you down for what you can do. Your life is your own. If you want to go back to your family, you can. Mine is gone. Even the mage clan is gone, scattered to the stars. I have to find us a new beginning. If you don't want to help me, that's fine. I'm sure your family would love to have you back.
Maybe I should go back to them then.
Maybe you should. Darius walked out of the bathroom in his pyjamas, done with his shower. He halted and swayed backward a fraction, as if an invisible wave had washed over him. His eyes widened and he looked from Carina to Bryce. Not a word needed to be said. He had felt their mutual anger as if it were palpable. She covered her eyes with one hand. Hurting her little brother was the last thing she wanted to do. Darius, maybe you should stay in Parthenia and Nala's room tonight.
But
Darius's protest petered out. Even he seemed to think it was a good idea in the circumstances.
Yeah, I'll take you.
No, Carina said firmly. I'll do it. She took Darius's hand and walked him to the cabin next door, where Parthenia and Nala were already in bed and reading, tired after their day's excitement. Parthenia made room for Darius and Carina kissed him good night before leaving. When she got back to her cabin, Bryce was in bed, lying on his side. She turned off the light and joined him. They lay facing away from each other and didn't say another word. It was some time before she slept. Chapter 29. The second rehearsal took place the next day. This time it was the mage's turn to lead the attack, if attack was the right word to describe what was proposed. The children didn't stand a chance of succeeding in a full frontal assault, so they were going to try to get past all of Cadwallader's troops without raising an alarm. If this proved unsuccessful, Atoy's mercs would try to get them out. As far as Carina could work it out from what Castiel had said about the mountain castle, the backup scenario was also a possibility. The alternative possibility that Castiel was feeding them bullshit was also never far from her mind. In the initial discussions with Cadwallader about the practice sessions, he had proposed that the defending troops should behave as if they were unaware of mages and casting. But Carina had pointed out that Castiel had spent time with the Dirksons, and that their leader, Sable Dirkson, was in all likelihood fully briefed on what mages could do. Carina insisted that Cadwallader prepare his troops accordingly. She'd also told her siblings they should not expect to surprise anyone with their powers. The only advantage they had was that Sable Dirkson was unlikely to be expecting them to walk right into her headquarters. The mages approached the cavern, taking an easier route this time, where the slopes were less steep and the loose shale was sparse. "Darius," Carina said, "cloak us." Providing they stuck together, they should not be seen by Cadwallader's soldiers for as long as the cast lasted. In theory, they would be able to explore the entire mountain castle in this manner. But there were several flaws to this plan. Some days prior, she had asked Darius to cloak himself several times in order to measure how long the cast lasted. She had discovered that, unfortunately, the period varied between 2 and 15 minutes. Even worse, the cloaked would not be able to tell when the cast had worn off. The first indication they would have that they were no longer invisible might be pulse rounds in their backs. To have any certainty of avoiding detection, Darius would have to cast cloak every 2 minutes. Even for a mage of his powers, the exercise would be utterly exhausting, if not impossible. "Ka!"
came Atoy's voice over Carina's comm. "Sit, Rep. 2 minutes from the entrance. No sign of any guards yet. Cloaking up." The woman's request was irritating. Did she expect the mages to fail so easily? The mages had saved Atoy's ass only yesterday. Cadwallader had posted 2 guards at the entrance, the same as in the previous rehearsal. Slipping in between them shouldn't be too hard. She didn't want to enthrall them if she didn't have to. Castiel had said Sable Dirksen knew about enthralling, and perhaps she'd informed her military of the signs. They might know when one of their number had been compromised. As before, Carina took the lead. The rest of the mages formed a tight diamond, with Darius at its centre. Parthenia took the rear point. The dark entrance to the cavern gaped in the mountain face. Cadwallader's 2 mercs stood on either side, silent, stock-still sentinels. The mages drew closer, and closer still. Carina was navigating a path that ran exactly between the 2 soldiers, who stood about 15 meters apart. "Kay, stick together," she commed. "We're nearly there." The mages walked slowly onward. Cadwallader had set no time limit on the rehearsal, and she didn't want to rush and make mistakes. Before they even reached the entrance, however, they were discovered. "Halt!" barked a guard over his external comm. "Who goes there?" He raised his weapon and pointed it almost directly at the group of mages. "Shit!" said Carina. "Stop! Get down low! Fern, Oriana, enthrall them both." "How does he know we're here?"
Darius asked. The other guard had caught on and was also aiming at them. "He heard us," Carina replied. Though they were wearing Eva suits, the rogue planet had an atmosphere. The guard must have heard the sound of their footfalls in the silence of the barren world. He had also clearly been briefed about the cloak cast. The first guard fired. The pulse narrowly missed her helmet. "Fern, Oriana?" "I did him," said Fern. The guard didn't fire again, and after Oriana's cast, the other looked uncertain about why she was holding a weapon. "Right," said Carina. "Let's go, quiet as you can." The mages passed between the 2 enthralled guards. They were inside the cavern, but already things weren't going to plan. The first guard had had time to inform Cadwallader about the suspicious sounds. The lieutenant colonel would probably already be checking to see if the entrance guards had been enthralled. A couple of questions would be all it took. "We have to hurry," Carina said. "Watch out!" shouted Castiel. 4 mercs had popped up from behind rocks to take random shots. "I'm going to fire back," Castiel said. "No, then they'll know exactly where we are. All of you, pick the one closest to you and cast Enthrall." A pulse round came perilously close.
"I've been hit!"
Oriana exclaimed. Carina closed her eyes to cast. Maintaining concentration in the circumstances was hard. She split the Enthrall character and sent it out to 2 of the mercs for good measure. A beat later, the shooting stopped. "Oriana, how badly are you hurt?"
"My visor says I'm incapacitated."
"Damn, we'll have to leave you here." "But outside of Darius's cloak they'll see her," Parthenia protested. "What happens when the enthrall casts start to wear off?" "It's either that or she tries to leave. But leaving the hideout without the protection of a cloak would be more dangerous. We'll have to assume we would find her somewhere to hide."
"I'll go behind that rock," said Oriana. "The guards won't notice me while they're enthralled."
"We have to hurry," said Fern. "We have to get down the tunnel before reinforcements arrive." Oriana left. "Okay," said Carina. "Let's move forward, fast." The group advanced. She asked Darius to cast Cloak again to keep them covered for the next encounter. They cautiously passed through the aperture at the back of the cave. Mercs burst from the crack at the end of the tunnel. "Get back!" Carina yelled. If they were cloaked and they pressed against the tunnel wall, the soldiers might pass them by.
She was surprised that Cadwallader had discovered their entry so quickly, or maybe he was guessing based on timing.
"Evacuate!" Cadwallader shouted over Carina's comm. "Evacuate immediately! Everyone back to the shuttle! Run!"
"Huh?" said Fern. "What's going on?" Parthenia asked. The mercs had reached them and run directly past. "I don't know," Carina replied. "But something's up. We'd better do what he says." They ran out of the tunnel and into the entrance cavern. The enthralled soldiers were following Cadwallader's command and leaving. Carina ran back across the mountainside toward the shuttle, checking her siblings kept up. It was hard going in the 1.6G. The way back was uphill, and she was soon sweating and panting as she made her way up the slope. She stopped and looked back. The children were having an even harder time of it. Castiel and Parthenia were several meters behind her, and the two shorter figures of Fern and Oriana were farther back still. Darius! Where was Darius? The others had moved out of the vicinity of his cloak, but he was still affected by it. She couldn't see him anywhere. "Darius," she said over comm, "where are you?" "I'm here," came the little boy's reply. In any other circumstances, his typical 7-year-old's response would have been funny, but at the moment, icy panic clutched her heart. "You're cloaked, remember? I can't see you. Can you see me?" The icy hand clutched tighter. "I can't see anyone." Chapter 30.
"Where are you, Lin?"
Cadwallader asked over comm. "I'm looking for my little brother. Whoever modified his suit accidentally removed the tracker. He isn't on the system." The rest of her siblings had made it to the shuttle, but Darius remained somewhere on the rocky mountain slope.
"The Duchess is about to be attacked," said Cadwallader. "Return to the shuttle now."
"I can't leave him here."
"We can get him later."
"No, he'll be terrified if we leave him here alone." A pause.
"You have 2 minutes, then the shuttle's leaving, with or without you."
Cadwallader cut the comm. "Darius, tell me what you can see." "I can see a bunch of rocks." The dark, rocky, sloping landscape spread out in front of her, bereft of movement. She could hear nothing over her external comm, except the hydrogenous atmosphere sighing over the stones. Somehow Darius appeared to have run in another direction after leaving the cavern. She blamed herself for leaving him behind in her haste. If she couldn't find him in time, Cadwallader would just have to leave without both of them. "What are the rocks like?" "One of them looks kinda like Parthenia's tarsal." She had no idea what a tarsal looked like. "Are they big rocks?" "Yeah." "How big? Bigger than me?" "Yeah, much bigger than you." She swung around in a circle, trying to see what area of the mountain Darius might be looking at. To her surprise, she saw a merc running toward her. It was Bryce. "Go back! You can't get left behind too."
"Shut up! You're wasting time. Where was the last place you saw him?"
"In the cavern. He took a wrong turn somewhere on the way back." As she spoke, she spotted a patch of large rocks over Bryce's shoulder. "I think he might be up there." She began to run up the slope. "Darius, look down. Look for me and Bryce."
1 minute, Lin," said Cadwallader.
"It's okay. We found him," she lied. "We're going to make it." Forcing her leg muscles hard against the gravity, she sped up the slope. Loosened shale slithered past her in an avalanche of stones. She slipped, fell to her knees, got up and ran. "I can see you! I can see you and Bryce, Carina!" "Great!" she huffed, barely able to speak. "Run to us, Darius! Remember, we can't see you, but be careful, it's easy to slip." She continued to struggle up the slope. The shuttle was more than a minute's run away, even in standard gravity. They were never going to make it. Something impacted her. Darius was clinging to her middle. She'd come within the influence of his cloak.
Whoa, where did you go?
I found him. He's here. Bryce was only a couple of meters away, turning around as he scanned the view. He stopped, his helmet's visor pointing directly at them.
There you are.
The cast had finally worn off.
Darius, jump on my back.
The three set off for the shuttle. The 2 minutes Cadwallader had given her were up, she had no doubt. Relying on his kind-heartedness to wait for them was probably useless. He would not risk the safety of all his mercs for the sake of 3 people, even if one of them was only a kid. They rounded a ridge. The Duchess's shuttle stood on roughly level ground in the distance, squat on its 8 feet like a black bug. As she ran toward the vessel, her muscles screaming with the effort, the ramp rose and the hatch shut. Shit! She opened a comm. Cadwallader, wait! We're nearly there! The hatch remained closed. She fully expected to see the shuttle's engine fire. Bryce was no longer beside her. He'd dropped behind. She ran to him. Darius, get on me! Bryce didn't protest. Darius, usually easy to carry, felt heavy as he wrapped his legs around her waist and his arms around her neck. The shuttle still hadn't taken off. It was less than 100 meters away. If the engine fired when they got closer, they would be seared by the heat, their EVA suits offering little protection. Then, while her gaze was glued to the vessel, the ramp lowered. She thanked the stars mentally. She had no breath for words. Cadwallader was kinder than she'd thought. Seconds later they ran up the ramp. It closed as they were on it, sending them tumbling into the ship and through the airlock until they sprawled on the deck between the feet of the mercs and mages. She felt the harsh shudder of the shuttle's engines starting up. Next she was pressed into the deck by the acceleration force as the vessel tore itself out of the planet's heavy gravity. She couldn't speak, she couldn't move. All she could see was EVA suit boots and Darius's small form lying on his back with his arms and legs spread out. Even in the extreme circumstances, he was starfishing. "I'm so glad you made it," said Parthenia.
What's going on? Asked Bryce. Has anyone said why we had to evacuate?
There's a warship bearing down on the Duchess and Zenobia, Fern said. It isn't answering any hails. Cadwallader thinks it's going to attack. We really thought he was going to leave you all behind, said Parthenia. He was going to leave them behind, Castiel said. Didn't you hear him arguing with the pilot? Carina's lungs continued to work overtime, her chest rising and falling heavily as she recovered from her desperate run. What? She gasped. Cadwallader was arguing with Stevenson? Yes, said Castiel. The pilot was refusing to leave without you. Cadwallader told him the next planet we get to, he's out of a job.
Thank the stars for old flames, huh, Carina? Said Bryce dryly.
Chapter 31. Aboard the Duchess, everything was in chaos. Before the shuttle's ramp had lowered, the mercs had crowded at the exit hatch, and as soon as it was down they sprinted out of the ship, not wasting time to take off their EVA suits. After the mercs had exited, Carina, Bryce and the children walked out into the shuttle bay. Nala joined them. Carina lifted her visor. Mercs were everywhere. Even Stevenson didn't stop to say a word before dashing out of the bay. She quickly lost sight of Cadwallader as he merged with the soldiers preparing for the attack. What should we do? Fern asked. Stay the hell out of the way for now. She knew that what appeared to be pandemonium was only the mercs getting to their stations, whether that was to man the weapons, prepare to repel boarders, or some other defensive task. She had played that role herself more than once, but now she had no role except to keep the children safe.
Maybe we should return to the Zenobia, said Bryce.
No, if we do come under attack, we're safer here than aboard a passenger vessel. The deck lifted and turned, throwing everyone down. "Get back to the shuttle," she said. It was all she could think to do. They couldn't help the mercs in a space battle. Starships moved too fast for casts to work. But the shuttle was firmly clamped into the bay, and the children could wear the safety harnesses. The Duchess bumped and lifted again. Stevenson was probably making evasive maneuvers to avoid a long-range attack. But the merc ship was attached to the Zenobia, which would make everything more difficult. A few of Cadwallader's troops remained aboard the smuggler's vessel, guarding the prisoners. While the children were strapping themselves in, Carina ran along the side of the well between the rows of seating and into the empty pilot's cabin. Sitting down in Stevenson's seat, she activated the controls. Bryce sat next to her in the co-pilot's position.
"What are you doing? Are you planning to fly us out of here?"
"That would be insane. I want to find out what's going on." The shuttle's console displayed the feed from the main ship. It took her a moment to figure out what she was seeing. Then she spotted it. A destroyer was approaching. The scan data indicated 4 pulse cannons, a single particle lance, and a smattering of smaller weapons, probably kinetic for close-range combat.
"Why the hell is that coming at us?"
"I have no idea." "Whoa!" The Duchess had swung violently around. She grabbed the console, her stomach feeling like it was taking its time to catch up with the rest of her body. The Duchess's pulse cannons fired.
"Isn't that premature?"
"I don't think so. From the ship's maneuvers, I think we've already been fired upon." A sudden acceleration flung her back in her seat. The force pinned her in place, and she looked down her nose at the display.
"I guess we're trying to get away."
"No, we're heading straight at them. Cadwallader's trying to scare them off." The enemy ship fired all 4 pulse cannons at once. "Shit!" She activated the shuttle's comm. "Brace yourselves, kids!" The Duchess returned fire, blasting 3 of the enemy's pulses to pieces, scattering their subatomic particles across space. But the 4th one made it through. The Duchess shuddered at its impact. "Carina," said Darius over the passenger comm, "I think I'm going to be sick." She heard Parthenia say something to him before the comm cut out. "I don't know what Cadwallader's thinking. That particle lance could cut the Duchess in 2 if we get too close." The Lieutenant Colonel's tactic of going on the offense didn't seem to be working. The enemy ship wasn't backing off or even slowing down. The 2 ships were flying at each other at top speed. What were Lomang and his men thinking, trapped in the brig and their cabins? They would have no idea what was happening.
"I still can't understand why that ship's attacking. How did it even happen to be passing in this region of space? We aren't on a trade route. We're in the middle of nowhere."
"Your guess is as good as—" She paused. He had made a good point. It was too much of a coincidence that another starship was within distance to pick up their trace, and the ship was a destroyer. The chances were so remote as to be nearly impossible.
"Does someone have a vendetta with Cadwallader or the Black Dogs?"
"It's possible. Merc bands tend to make plenty of enemies along the way. But something tells me that isn't it." Fire flashed from the destroyer, and 4 pulses of pure energy flew toward the Duchess. She cursed under her breath. The merc ship could only take so much battering. Cadwallader's strategy of aggression seemed desperate, as if he knew they couldn't outrun their attacker. Yet neither could the ship withstand a close encounter with the particle lance. This time 2 of the pulses made it through. The judder the Duchess gave seemed to tear her apart.
"This is it. We aren't going to make it."
She had to agree. The Duchess wouldn't survive another hit like that. The enemy didn't even seem to want to preserve the merc ship for boarding. It was intent on blowing it to pieces. They were going to die, and no one knew why. She gasped. The scanners were picking up energy building in the particle beam. The enemy was preparing to strike its final blow. She turned to Bryce. He read the look on her face, and his own paled. She reached out for his hand. "Bryce, I'm sorry."
"No, I am. I've been a—"
"No, it was my fault." There were no more words to be said. She gripped his hand tightly. The scan readings were going off the scale. White-hot brilliance shone out from the destroyer. A blade bright as starlight leapt across space, bridging the gap between the Duchess and its vanquisher. She tensed, wanting to scream, but no sound came out. Then it was over. Chapter 32. The blade had vanished. They were still alive, but something was very, very wrong. The emergency lights were flashing, and the reverberating, repetitive alarm wailed. From outside the shuttle came a terrible roar and a cacophony of objects clashing and banging. The destroyer continued to bear down on them, but its pulse cannons remained inactive, and the particle lance was drained of energy. Perhaps the enemy did intend to board after all. She couldn't figure out what the noise was. It was familiar, yet she couldn't place it. Then it hit her. She had heard the same sound years before, when the Duchess's hull had been breached. What she could hear was the rush of escaping air, but highly magnified. This wasn't a small hull breach, it was a massive hole. Maybe the Merc's vessel had been sliced in two as she'd feared. She calmed the children. "Close your visors. You'll be breathing your suit's atmosphere from now on. And whatever you do, do not unfasten your safety harnesses." The bay was empty. The shuttle was clamped to the deck, and in their EVA suits they couldn't feel any of the effects of the breach, only hear the awful toll it was taking. She watched her HUD as it displayed the falling atmospheric gases. Many Mercs had probably been sucked into space, though luckily most of them were also wearing EVA suits and should survive if they were picked up. Anything not bolted down would be gone, and anyone in the way of an exiting object would be injured or killed. If the particle beam had sliced into the Duchess's engines, the ship would be dead in space, vulnerable to whatever the enemy had in mind. She hoped none of the Mercs would spill the beans about her family's mage powers, but she had to face the fact that one or two of them almost certainly would, hopeful of buying some clemency. The one called Chandu, for instance, he wouldn't hesitate to betray them. Cadwallader and Atoy would be killed. As officers, they presented the greatest threat to the captors as the most likely leaders of escape attempts. On the other hand, the enemy could just kill everyone. "What's happening, Carina?" Parthenia asked shakily. "We've been hit. Just sit tight, everyone, until we have more information." She couldn't think what else to say. The thought of the danger her family was in was killing her. "Is everything going to be okay?" asked Oriana. "Just sit tight." An age seemed to pass. Each second she imagined enemy soldiers coming in to search the bay and finding her, Bryce, and her family. They still had the weapons they'd been carrying for the rehearsal. They could fight back, firing and casting, but what would be the point? They had nowhere to go, no safe haven to retreat to. The Duchess was so damaged that even if they managed to take her back and expel the boarders, they couldn't escape in her. The shuttle's console was not connected to the Duchess's diagnostics, and she didn't want to distract Cadwallader or Atoy from whatever they were doing to save the ship, not even for a second, so she couldn't find out what had happened. They all waited, not speaking, for whatever would happen next. First, the dreadful clanging stopped. Anything loose aboard the ship had been sucked into space. Then the roaring faded away. The atmospheric readings on her HUD began to rise. The Mercs had sealed the breach. Or had it been the enemy after boarding the ship? No one had entered the bay. She couldn't wait any longer. She unfastened her harness. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to find out what's going on." She opened the pilot's hatch and climbed down onto the deck of the bay. She could hear voices, but they were distant. She lifted her visor. No fighting seemed to be in progress, so either the Duchess hadn't been boarded or the fight was over. She stepped over a clamp holding one of the shuttle's feet and crossed to the exit. The portal had been open the entire time, but since all the mercs had left, she hadn't seen anyone pass by. She walked out into the passageway. Running footsteps echoed from the metal deck and bulkheads. It sounded like just one heavy person, running in booted feet, getting nearer. She turned, intending to scoot back into the bay, but she was too late. A figure appeared in an Eva suit. It was a merc, her visor down. Carina's was up, so she had no HUD to tell her who it was. The person didn't slow down or break step as they drew nearer. She was about to back into the bulkhead to make room when the merc grabbed her into a hug, lifting her off her feet. Atoy opened her visor. "You're alive! Stars! I thought you and the kids had been sucked into space. We waited in the shuttle. When I saw the attack, I told everyone to strap in. Good thing you did. We lost half the platoon. It's gonna take us forever to retrieve them." "So we weren't boarded?" "No, they don't seem interested in us, whoever the hell they are." "Huh? They didn't even try? Or did we damage their ship after all?" "Not enough to stop them from trying to board. Come on, I'll show you what happened." "Wait, is it safe for the kids and Bryce to leave the shuttle?" "Should be fine. We sealed the hole pretty tight." She calmed Bryce with the good news and then set off with Atoy. They didn't have far to go. Atoy took her to the Duchess's docking port. Mechanics brushing past the two women, running to and fro from the structure. A breach sheet covered the circular hatchway. Hollows dipped across the entire sheet's surface, outlining thick bars that ran across to the farther side. "We had to weld the bars in place," said Atoy. "But it's pretty tough now. Should hold until we reach a planet or shipyard." "The enemy cut away the docking port?" "Cut right through it." It seemed an odd thing to do. Boarding a ship was hard when atmosphere and miscellaneous objects were flying out of it. Then she remembered. "But that's what was—" "Connecting us to the Zenobia," Atoy finished, nodding. "It was the Zenobia they wanted, not us. As soon as they'd severed the Duchess from her, they stopped firing. They grappled her." In one way, the enemy's focus on the passenger vessel made sense. The Zenobia was carrying plenty of valuable contraband, but that meant the attackers knew about it, and she couldn't figure out how. After she'd gotten the information about the ship's tracker from Lomang and sent a message packet to the Black Dogs, she'd been careful to shut the device down. In any case, the point of the tracker was to enable Lomang to locate his ship, not someone else, and they'd travelled weeks since then. Had the enemy ship trailed them the entire way, following the Duchess and Zenobia's traces? Atoy laughed at her expression. "Yeah, we can't figure it out either, Car. You'd better go and see Cadwallader. You two have to decide what happens next." She realized her new situation with shock and dismay. Now the Zenobia was gone, so was her only way of paying the Black Dogs. And if she had nothing to pay the mercs, there would be no attempt to infiltrate the Dirksons' headquarters, no protection from Ostalon's hungry mobs, and no safe passage anywhere in the sector, let alone to Earth. What was more, she hadn't a clue how she would pay Cadwallader for services rendered so far. She would have to rely on his generosity for food and board until they reached the nearest habitable planet. Surviving the enemy's attack had seemed a miracle, but for her personally, it had brought a disaster. "I'll come with you," Atoy offered. "Thanks. Together we might pierce the man's flinty heart." Chapter 33. Cadwallader was in his office. He'd changed out of his Eva suit, though it was draped over a chair, as if he imagined he might need to put it on again in a hurry. "I thought I might see you soon," he said as Carina and Atoy walked in. He seemed unsurprised that Carina hadn't been harmed, but she realized he had access to all the Eva suit signal data. He knew she'd been in the shuttle the whole time.
Sit down, Lin. Atoy, you're dismissed. Go and supervise the repairs or do something else useful.
Atoy raised her eyebrows at Carina as she turned and left. Carina sat down opposite the lieutenant colonel. She unfastened the front of her Eva suit and removed her helmet. "Sir," she said, out of force of habit. She couldn't sit in that room with that man and in a subordinate position without reverting to the familiar salutation. "Is there any chance at all of getting the Zenobia back?"
Not a single one in all Hell's domains. We're damn lucky to have come out of the engagement with so few casualties. I'm not prepared to risk the Duchess for even twice the contents of the Zenobia's hold.
"What about Lomang's other ship, the one that can travel between sectors? We could go there and—"
Impossible. The Duchess would never make it that far.
Gloom settled deeper over Carina. How many lives were lost?
4 so far.
What happened to the guards you left aboard the Zenobia? Are they still there?
No, I recalled them when the battle started to turn sour. I was prepared to lose the Zenobia to boarders, but not the Duchess.
In the end, the decision was made for you.
Yes, the casualties resulted from the massive decompression after the particle lance got us. But we're in contact with most of the troops who were sucked out of the ship. Stevenson's gonna take the shuttle to retrieve them.
Cadwallader's jaw muscles flexed as he mentioned the pilot's name. She regretted that he had been reminded of Stevenson's refusal to follow orders so that she, Bryce and Darius could get back to the shuttle before it returned to the ship. The delay wouldn't have made a difference to the outcome of the battle, but to Cadwallader that wasn't the point. She felt bad for Stevenson, who had been flying with the Black Dogs for several years and was well liked. Thank the stars they were wearing Eva suits.
Indeed.
An uncomfortable number of seconds passed. Cadwallader leaned forward and rested his elbows on his desk. He passed a hand over his face and his shoulders slumped. His adamantine facade crumbled a little, and his pale blue eyes became tired and defeated.
Lin, things aren't going too well for the Black Dogs. As time has gone on, I've come to understand why Tarsalan agreed to all those suicide missions. It turns out the mercenary business isn't as lucrative as some might imagine. This job you offered us was set to restore the company's financial reserves, which have nearly run dry. The Duchess needs extensive repairs, restocking and refueling. This all costs money we don't have. I'm afraid it's the end of the line for us, and with the best will in the galaxy, we won't be able to help you in your undertaking.
That's okay. I guessed as much. But, well, now we have nowhere to go, so...
For goodness sake, I'm not planning on marooning you all. You can stay with us until we reach a world where I can sell the Duchess and all her equipment. Then I'll split the proceeds and the mercs can disembark.
She exhaled. Thanks.
It'll be a squeeze, but we'll find berths for you all. Perhaps you can pay for your passage by providing entertainment with your tricks.
Her eyes widened.
Just kidding.
Cadwallader cracked a smile.
Ah.
He stretched his arms and back.
It's been an interesting few years, but perhaps it's time to move on to something new.
Will you sign up for the military again?
I don't know. The only options available these days are to work for the Schurers or the Dirksons, and I don't like either of them. Maybe a whole change of pace is what's called for, a new beginning.
That's what I would like too, for me and my family.
I wish you luck, you and your bunch of gutsy youngsters.
A light flashed on his desk's console and he pressed it. A shuttle has left the Zenobia, sir.
Is it heading our way?
No, it appears to be heading into deep space. The lieutenant colonel frowned.
Deep space? Where the hell's it going?
Nowhere, as far as anyone can tell, sir. Its current trajectory doesn't lead anywhere.
Is a destroyer firing on it?
Not yet, sir.
Well, is it sending out a distress signal?
No. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, it's just started, sir. The Zenobia shuttles are tiny, Carina informed him. They're 2-seaters, emergency evac only. I checked them out when we took over the ship. They don't carry much fuel or provisions. Whoever's inside it won't get very far. Cadwallader seemed to turn over the news in his mind for a moment. Then he said,
You know what? I'm interested to find out what this whole thing has been about, even if it means 1 or 2 more mouths to feed.
He spoke into his comm button.
Stevenson, your first pickup is that shuttle that's just left the Zenobia. Tow it into the bay.
He closed the comm.
Let's go and see who's so desperate to get away from the smuggler's ship.
The Zenobia shuttle was spherical. 4 pointed legs stuck out from its base so that it rested securely on a flat surface. Carina and Cadwallader watched it through the window of the closed bay door, waiting for Stevenson to leave on his next trip to begin picking up the stranded mercs and for the outer doors to close. Carina had passed by Bryce and the kids on her way over to the bay. To her relief, her siblings hadn't appeared too shaken up by the attack. Whoever was inside the tiny ship in the bay had the good sense not to emerge while the transition was going on. When the safety light activated, Cadwallader opened the bay's inner doors and motioned for the pair of mercs he'd asked to accompany him to go inside. Together he and Carina walked to the dull grey sphere. A single line traced a rectangle on its surface. The 2 mercs stood on each side of the rectangle, aiming their weapons at it. As Carina and the lieutenant colonel arrived at the shuttlecraft, the line broke. A rectangular chunk of the shuttle's hull pushed out and lifted up on slim hydraulic cylinders. When the occupant emerged, for some reason Carina couldn't quite understand, she was not at all surprised to discover it was Lomang. The smuggler had slimmed down some more since the last time she'd seen him. His weight loss was fortunate. He might not have been able to fit through the hatch otherwise. His iridescent blue conical hat had returned to its usual position on his head, and he smiled ingratiatingly. A ladder of woven metal had dropped from the shuttle. Lomang climbed down rather clumsily before speaking. He bowed and said,
My humble thanks for rescuing us. Your kindness and mercy will be long remembered in my family.
Us, said Cadwallader.
Tell whoever remains in your vessel to come out immediately. Naturally.
Lomang spoke in another tongue, issuing a command toward the hidden passenger. This time Carina was surprised at who emerged from the shuttle's interior. It was the giant. The ladder swayed and creaked as the huge man descended it. In truth, he could have probably stepped down from the open hatch directly to the deck without much difficulty. The giant displayed none of his former threatening demeanour. Like Lomang, he appeared grateful and submissive, bending as low as his large frame would allow.
Please allow me to introduce my twin brother,
said Lomang,
though I believe you have already met.
He looked sheepish. Your twin brother? Carina blurted. Annoyance paid a brief visit to the smuggler's features. Then he was all smiles again.
Fraternal, of course.
Cadwallader commanded his soldiers to search the brothers and the shuttle. When no weapons or explosives were found, he ordered them to take the men to the mission room. After the smuggler and his brother had left, Cadwallader took a look at the interior of the shuttle himself. Appearing to be satisfied with his inspection, he climbed down the ladder.
What do you think this is about, Lin?
I can only think Lomang must have made himself more than one enemy in his time in this sector. He was dealing in illegal goods, so it seems inevitable he would rub up against some dangerous people. Maybe he tricked someone and they've hunted him down.
That would explain why their beef was with him, not us.
and how the attacker knew the Zenobia was carrying highly valuable cargo.
The Duchess isn't exactly worthless, but it's pretty obviously a harder prize to win. You know this Lomang better than anyone. Would you help me question him?
I'd love to. Her curiosity was deeply piqued. There was clearly a story behind the recent events, and the slimmest of chances she might learn something that would lift her out of her current mess. Chapter 34. As Carina settled in for another interview with Lomang, she considered immediately enthralling him in order to be confident that what he told her and Cadwallader was the truth. But she dismissed the idea. The problem with interrogating an enthralled person was that they would only answer the exact question you asked them, and in an emotionless manner. They would give no indication of the sensitivity of the information they were telling you, and hence no clue about when it was appropriate to probe more deeply. Unless you knew the right questions to ask, you might skirt past a vital fact without even knowing it. Questioning a subject when they were in full control of themselves and reading their tells would be more effective. She would also be able to tell the difference between what Lomang said while he was not enthralled and then while he was under, which might reveal something he wanted to hide. The smuggler and his brother sat side by side in the mission room, flanked by two mercs aiming weapons at them. Even so, she didn't feel entirely safe in close proximity to the giant. He looked capable of inflicting considerable damage before pulse rounds would fell him.
"I'd like to introduce my brother,"
Lomang said, noting her gaze on the large man.
"His name is Papu. As I said, we are twins, but I am older by 3 minutes.
He held up 3 pudgy fingers and grinned.
"Such small accidents of fate make all the difference, do they not, brother?" "They do, brother,"
said Papu, folding his arms and gazing at Carina. The way his muscles bulged and moved under his skin reminded her of the animals they had ridden on Pyrene when leaving the matching. Was he remembering she'd left him in the hold, trapped within the mech's pincers for hours?
"Tell us everything you know about the people who attacked us,"
said Cadwallader.
Where to begin? It is a very long story. We have time. However, if I feel you're wasting mine, I'll return you to your hollow ball and send you back into space. Then I will tell you the condensed version. The dear person who so badly wanted the Zenobia as to inconvenience yourselves is the illustrious Mezban Kazbali Noran, Procurator of the Majestic Isles, member of the Encircling Council, and, I am deeply proud to say, my wife."
A profound silence followed this announcement. Cadwallader gave a small cough and shifted in his seat.
"The person commanding that destroyer is your wife?"
Lomang nodded.
"She has spirit, does she not?"
He smiled proudly. "Your wife put you and your brother into that tiny shuttle and expelled you into deep space?" Carina asked.
"What can I say? She is disgusted that I allowed my ship to be taken. I and my crew all remained under confinement when she boarded the Zenobia, you see. She wishes to dissolve our marriage. Papu, as my brother, has been similarly rejected by her on the basis of his close association with me."
"Don't you have divorces on your world?" Cadwallader asked. "Setting you adrift in deep space with only enough air to last you a day or two seems excessive."
"My dearest Mezban sometimes overreacts a little. She may have changed her mind and retrieved our shuttle eventually, or she may not,"
Papu said phlegmatically, his voice rumbling in a bass tone.
"Or she may not,"
Lomang agreed.
Hence our gratitude regarding your kindness. I assume now that we pose no threat to you, we may have the freedom of your ship."
A great bark of laughter erupted from Cadwallader. Carina said, "I think you have your answer. There's something I don't understand. How did your wife find you?"
"I had sent her a message before you took over the ship with the help of your traitorous brother. My wonderful wife has been searching the sector for me ever since she discovered me absent from our home. After I sent her the message to set up our reconciliation, and what a reconciliation it would have been, she must have gone to the coordinates I sent her, and then, finding my ship gone, followed the trace. When she saw the Zenobia had been taken by a military vessel, my beloved one came to my rescue."
"She came to your rescue, yet she's disgusted you allowed your ship to be taken, and she wants to dissolve your marriage." Lomang smiled sardonically. He and his brother exchanged a glance.
"I confess there is more to my story that I would rather not tell you. But I know you have the power to extract the information from me whether I like it or not. Unfortunately, certain items Mezban seeks, which I borrowed from her some time ago, were not aboard the ship, and she grew rather angry. Her passions run high in all regards, but especially when it comes to her property. I was going to return the items naturally, but events took an unexpected turn when you took over my ship. Since then, my wife's goods have been purloined, and my brother and I have been forced to suffer the consequences."
"Your wife's stuff has gone from the ship? If it has, none of us has taken it. At least nothing's been removed from the hold of the Zenobia as far as I know. All I and my family took from the ship is the clothes we're wearing. We left everything else behind when we went on the rehearsal." The last remark was addressed to Cadwallader. She'd wondered if it was possible a merc had snuck into the hold, but it seemed unlikely. She'd fixed the security so that only she or Bryce could enter it, and she couldn't imagine Bryce taking anything without telling her.
"I accept your words, and yet those items are missing. They were never located in the hold."
She was flummoxed. "What are we talking about? Maybe someone took some things without understanding their value."
"The items, my dear, are heirlooms my wife inherited from her mother, who inherited them from her mother, and so on back 7 or 8 generations. They are precious stones set into jewelry, but the settings are unimportant."
Cadwallader said,
"You stole your wife's jewelry and ran away with it, so she came after you with a destroyer to get it back. The stones are extremely rare. They have never been discovered anywhere else in the galaxy except upon my home world, and no new stones have been discovered there for hundreds of years. There is no word for them in your tongue. Expressing my deep apology for my actions and my even deeper, most profound love, I promised I would return her jewelry to her and show her all the goods I had obtained with them. I had used the stones as promised payment for the cargo you discovered in my ship's hold. When the time for exchange came, I substituted fakes. When I went to the real gem's secret hiding place, the jewelry was gone."
"Then she has to believe we have it."
"At the moment, the thought doesn't appear to have crossed her mind. She is in one of her wonderful fits of passion. She is a sight to behold."
He paused, and his eyes became shiny with tears.
"I hope this is not the final time I am privileged to witness her in full flight, so to speak."
Cadwallader stood up and walked a few steps before murmuring into his comm.
"For some reason, she thinks I am lying to her about the stones, and that I bargained them away for the cargo in the hold. Why she should believe this, I do not know."
Papu said,
Perhaps it is because you have lied to her many times in the past. Yes,
Lomang conceded.
that may be the reason.
Carina felt the Duchess's engines kick in and the ship begin to move. Sir, she said to Cadwallader, I'm going to find my little brother. He can cloak the ship. That way, when Lomang's wife calms down and starts thinking straight, she'll find it hard to follow us.
That sounds like a very good idea.
Chapter 35. Cadwallader assigned Carina, her family and Bryce a 4-bunk cabin. It was cramped to say the least. Bryce and Darius were to share 1 bunk, Carina and Nala another, Oriana and Fern the 3rd, and Parthenia had the final bunk to herself. Castiel elected to sleep on the floor. Carina had suggested that Oriana and Parthenia share 1 bunk and Fern and Castiel share another, but Castiel had refused, saying he wasn't going to sleep with anyone's stinky feet in his face. The comparison between the Mercs' quarters aboard the Duchess and the luxurious passenger cabins of the Zenobia was marked. But as the children took in their new living and sleeping area, Carina was surprised and pleased to hear not one complaint nor even a comment. Her siblings seemed to be getting used to roughing it. In some ways it was a shame they had to undergo the transformation. She wanted nothing more than for them to lead normal lives, free from the threat of persecution and personal danger. On the other hand, if they were to make it to Lomang's intersector vessel and then to Earth, adaptability would be a distinct advantage. After deciding who would sleep where, she sent the children to the mess. It had been hours since any of them had eaten. She was hungry too, but she wanted some time alone to think about what they would do next. Cadwallader's plan was to fly to a place called Martha's Rest, a well-known trading hub. It was far away, but they had just enough fuel to reach it. There he hoped to sell the Duchess. Bryce closed the door after the children left and sat on the lower bunk where she was lying. She'd borrowed an interface to look up information. When Bryce sat down, she laid the device on her chest. "Not hungry?" she asked.
I thought it would be good to have some time alone together.
"I guess it would." He took her hand.
When that destroyer was attacking us, I thought we'd had it.
Me too. She covered his hand with her free one. She'd explained about everything that Lomang had told her and Cadwallader in the mission room. "You know," she continued after a pause, "it didn't even occur to me to ask Darius to cloak the Duchess while we were being attacked."
I don't think it would have made any difference. The destroyer's crew would have seen where the pulse cannons were firing from.
Yeah, but we could have moved, though I don't know if Darius could have cloaked both ships. Still, it's something to remember if we ever find ourselves in a similar position. They lapsed into silence again.
When I thought we were all gonna die, I tried to say sorry for being an asshole.
I know. It's okay. I think I kind of understand. And you're right, I have been difficult to be around. I didn't realise how much I'd slipped back into being a merc once I was with them again.
It was strange seeing you change. You weren't different all the time, not around Darius, for instance, and it wasn't like the changes were that bad. In fact, in some ways,
the corner of his lip lifted into a half-smile.
It was pretty hot.
She raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She lifted herself up onto her elbows. The interface slid onto her stomach and she moved it onto the bed. "How about you show me how hot I was?" He leaned down to kiss her. After a moment he pulled away and said,
"Do these room doors lock?"
"Huh, what do you think?"
That's a pity."
He kissed her again. "Not that it usually stops people," she said after a while. "I mean, if someone were to come in and catch us, it wouldn't be the first time it's happened.
Not by a long shot. But if it were one of the kids, That would be traumatic for everyone concerned.
Good point. She lay down and picked up the interface. We'll just have to wait a little bit longer. He sighed. I'm trying to figure out what to do when we get to Martha's Rest. I can't decide if we should continue on to Ostalon and try to find out how to get to Earth, or if we should try to reach the interceptor vessel Lomang gave me the coordinates for. We need a ship like that so badly, and we could try to figure out how to get to Earth later. That's where Lomang's going the first chance he gets. No doubt about it. Though I don't know how he'll get there with no creds and no ship. Unless his wife decides to forgive him and finds him again.
She'll have a hard time doing that now Darius is cloaking the Duchess.
So maybe we're safe going to Ostalon for a short time before setting out for the interceptor ship.
I don't know if safe is the right word, but yeah, maybe. Unless Lomang left a skeleton crew behind with instructions to leave or do something else if he isn't back within a certain time.
It would be risky to leave a ship like that entirely unmanned, even if it was in the middle of nowhere.
We have a lot of time to think about what to do next. Let's go and eat.
The mess was emptying when they arrived. The kids were sitting together at a table, 3 on each side. Carina and Bryce filled plates from the buffet food that remained and joined them. "This food is disgusting," Castiel said as they sat down. "Welcome to the military," she said. "And don't say that around Lieutenant Colonel Cadwallader, or he might decide to halve your rations as a punishment." "I'll eat yours if you don't want it," said Fern. He had recently started eating everything he could get his hands on and was shooting up before her eyes. Castiel pulled his plate closer and folded a protective arm around it. "Get your own." She began to eat. The food wasn't really that bad, and even if it were, she was in no position to complain. She would be relying entirely on Cadwallader's generosity all the way to Martha's Rest. She would have to think of a way to show her gratitude somehow. Perhaps she could perform some casts that would increase the final payout to all the black dogs before they disbanded. She looked up and noticed Bryce was staring at something behind her. She turned and saw Stevenson walking over. She tensed. Was Bryce going to get all jealous again? He wasn't taking his eyes from the pilot. Then he seemed to come to some sort of a decision. As Stevenson arrived, he stood up and held out his hand across the table.
"I don't think we've met."
The pilot shook his hand a little warily as the 2 men introduced themselves.
"Is it okay if I sit down?"
"Sure," Carina replied. "We're nearly done anyway."
"I bet this brings back some memories,"
said Stevenson. Before she could reply, he went on,
"I was talking to Cadwallader just now about what's in store when we reach our next destination."
"Yeah, he and I had a similar conversation. I wanted to thank you for forcing him to wait for us on the rogue planet and apologize for the fact you're losing your job. Only it turns out everyone's losing their job."
"Don't speak too soon,"
he replied enigmatically. Parthenia stood up. "We are going back to the cabin. Thanks for looking after the children, Parthenia. Try to get them to keep the noise down, all right? The Mercs aren't used to having kids around."
"It's more likely the Mercs will disturb the kids,"
Stevenson joked.
"Hey, Nala, could you stick around?"
Carina shared a glance with Bryce. What could the pilot want with a little girl? It wasn't likely she'd be naughty while he'd been looking after her during the rehearsal. She was the best behaved of the whole set. Stevenson said,
"Cadwallader happened to mention something Lomang had been talking about after he brought him aboard. Something about some jewels."
At the word jewels, Nala gasped and turned scarlet.
"It's okay,"
said Stevenson gently.
"You aren't in any trouble. Well, maybe just a little bit. But it's all going to be fine."
The little girl's hands rose to her face and she began to cry. The pilot touched her shoulder.
"Don't worry. Just show Carina and Bryce what you showed me."
"I just wanted to look like Mother," Nala sobbed. "They're pretty." "Stars alive," said Carina. "Nala, show me what you have." The little girl reached under the neck of her dress and pulled up a string. Hanging from it was a pouch of soft, fine material, typical of the stuff Lomang carried on the Zenobia.
"I really don't think she thought she was doing anything wrong,"
Stevenson said.
"or she wouldn't have shown them to me."
Carina wasn't so sure. Nala's behaviour indicated she knew she'd done something that wasn't quite right. But none of that mattered if the contents of the pouch were what she thought they were. Nala handed it to Stevenson, who pulled open the top. He looked around the mess, which had emptied. Only the four of them were there to witness the reveal. He upended the pouch, and a mess of silvery chains and precious stones spilled out. Carina lifted a chain out of the pile, disentangling it from the rest. It was a necklace, probably made from platinum, but it was the stones that drew her attention. From Lomang's description, she'd expected them to be bigger, but most were only about the size of her thumbnail. She rested the mounted stones in the palm of her hand and held them up to the mess's poor lighting. She'd never seen anything like them. Light seemed to emanate from within, firelight that flickered and shifted. "They're so lovely," Nala said. Her tears had dried and the stones held her gaze as if she were mesmerized. "Where did you find these?" "I saw a funny sign on the map of the ship." Carina recalled the hours her sister had spent poring over the Zenobia's blueprints, apparently fascinated by the ship's design and engineering. "I wondered what it was, so I went to take a look. I found a secret cupboard in the back of another cupboard in the passenger galley. When I saw the pretty stones someone had hidden there, I thought I'd done something wrong, so I didn't tell anyone. But I liked them so much, I didn't want to put them back either. I'm sorry."
"She showed me her secret find while you were away on the first rehearsal," said Stevenson. "I thought the jewels were worth something, but I didn't want to get her into trouble, so I didn't tell you. It wasn't until Cadwallader mentioned Lomang's claim that something valuable had been taken from his ship, some jewels, that I put two and two together."
"Nala, sweetheart," said Carina. She held out her arms. "Come here." As she hugged her sister, she said, "I think you might have saved us all." Chapter 36. The jewels had changed everything. Carina felt kind of bad for not giving them back to Lomang, but not bad enough to actually hand them over. Besides, technically, they weren't even his. Though she had never heard of the precious stones, they were apparently famous and highly prized throughout the sector. Called ember gems, their rarity had lent them an almost mythical status. At Martha's Rest, Cadwallader paid for repairs and a refit of the Duchess with just one of them. Another gem had bought fuel, supplies, and the latest weapons and armour for the entire Merc band. Carina had given Cadwallader one more in payment for the Black Dog's upcoming service on Ostalon, and then kept the rest. She wore them around her neck, as Nala had done, sometimes shuddering at the thought that for a time they had been a little girl's playthings. She was sitting with Stevenson in the Duchess's cockpit after another lesson in flying starships when her hand strayed to the pouch. At the same time, her mind strayed to the question of how all their lives might have turned out differently if Nala hadn't been curious about that symbol on the Zenobia's blueprints. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. "You've mentioned it a couple of times, but I didn't know if you were being serious." Stevenson made an adjustment on his flight control panel before replying.
"I believe there's more to existence than we currently understand. Look at you, for instance. What explanation is there for what you and your Sibs do?"
"Nai-Nai, My grandmother and Ma told me the explanation accepted among mages. It makes sense in a way, but it doesn't explain it properly.
What does mage lore have to say about what you do?
That most mages' energy to cast comes from the stars, and the mages who derive their energy that way are called star mages. Parthenia, Oriana, Fern and I are all star mages. Darius is a spirit mage. His energy comes from living things. As for Castiel, I'm pretty sure he's a dark mage. Dark mage's energy is hidden in the universe.
That does make a little sense, and there's no doubt that what you do is real, so there has to be an explanation for it.
I might find the answer on Earth. That's where mages originated, so it stands to reason that's where most research was done.
But assuming you're right about mages originating there, and that you managed to find the planet, is it likely any of the information still exists after all this time?
Who knows? But at least I will have tried. More important to her than information about mages was the dream that Earth would be somewhere people had learned from their history of persecuting mages and grown more tolerant and accepting. All she wanted was for her and her family to be left alone and to live without fear. It didn't seem too much to ask.
Your boyfriend, Bryce, is he going with you?
He says he wants to. I hope he does.
That's quite a commitment.
He's quite a guy. She spoke somewhat flippantly, but she meant it.
He is? I mean, if you say so. But he seemed the jealous type for a while there.
He was, but he got over it.
I'm glad, for your sake.
So am I. I think I figured out where he was coming from. You see, he got really sick one time, and his entire family abandoned him. They just went off and left him to die, alone and homeless. He says he's forgiven them and gotten over it, but I don't think he ever has. I think deep down he's worried I'm going to abandon him too.
That must be hard.
Stevenson's attention returned to the Duchess's flight controls. She snuck a glance at the man's profile as he worked. Bryce hadn't been wrong when he'd sensed something between them. The pilot had been a port in a stormy sea for her when she'd first joined the Black Dogs. After years of homelessness, she'd been well fitted to the name of the band. She'd been feral, scared, determined to prove herself, desperate for and terrified of companionship. She'd been a mess. She'd bounced around the other mercs, not knowing who was friend or foe, who was genuine and who wanted to take advantage of her. And the mercs themselves were almost as much of a mess as she was. The lifestyle attracted the worst and most damaged of humanity. At times, Stevenson had seemed the only sane, normal one among them, with the exception of Cadwallader and Speedle, whose higher ranks prevented them from having much to do with her. The pilot had helped calm her down and reassure her that she was doing okay, that she wasn't about to be kicked out of the band. He'd warned her of the mercs to stay away from and who she could trust, to an extent. They had never been exclusive. That wasn't how it worked when you didn't know if you would still be alive at the end of the next mission. But they had been more than friends, and Bryce's gut had told him so.
You'd better go ask your little brother to begin cloaking the ship,
Stevenson said. Are we nearly there?
Uh-huh. It would be better if the Dirksons didn't know we were coming.
She got up to leave, but she paused and turned. Bending down, she gave the pilot a hug.
Not unwelcome,
he said affectionately.
But why?
The last time we parted ways, I didn't get to say a proper goodbye. After this mission's over, we probably won't see each other again. I just wanted to say thanks.
For what?
He had drawn back and was looking her in the eyes. I don't know, just for being who you are, and for being there for me when it counted.
I could say the same.
He gave a soft smile.
Good luck, Carina. I hope that if fate does exist, it leads you where you want to go.
Chapter 37. The Duchess sat on the dark side of a gas giant in Ostalon's system, gathering data on the state of affairs on the Dirksons' former hideaway planet. The ship's scanners had been set to pick up signal leakage, media reports, private conversations, and comms on domestic matters would paint a picture of what was happening. It had been months since Carina had left, or rather, had been kidnapped and forced to leave. Were things still as dire? Perhaps the Dirksons had closed up shop and left. That would be ideal. But she had a feeling things would not be so simple or easy. They never were. But she was in a better position than she'd been for a long time. Ever, in fact. After plenty of practice and meditation, the kids' casting had improved enormously, and the black dogs were battle-ready, equipped with state-of-the-art weapons and armour. It would have been good to carry out more rehearsals, but this was her chance and she was going to take it. She was on the bridge with Cadwallader when the latest computer analysis of the scan data arrived. He was first to check it.
"It's the same."
"The same?" she echoed.
"Not a thing."
"You're sure there can't be an error?"
"We ran diagnostics on all the scanners like you asked. They're all functioning perfectly. They're just not picking up any signals from Ostalon."
"It doesn't seem possible. The situation was bad when we left, but it's hard to imagine things going so far south that no planet-wide comm systems are working."
"We can send out probes. Maybe get some visuals of the surface, especially that mountain range where your brother says the Dirkson headquarters is situated."
She nodded. "Please do that. Another 6 or 12 hours wait wouldn't hurt." She was fairly confident that due to Darius's regular cloaking of the Duchess, they had slipped into the system unnoticed. Providing they remained in their current position, they shouldn't be detected. A departing Dirkson vessel might happen to pick up on the Duchess's presence, but the chances of that were slim. Cadwallader said,
"This gives me an idea about what to do with Lomang and his little brother."
They had been debating how to get rid of the smugglers for some time, without coming up with a solution. Murdering the 2 men in cold blood seemed harsh, yet if they allowed them to go free, there was little doubt that Lomang would come after them. Perhaps in his wife's destroyer. The fact that Nala had taken his jewellery from the Zenobia had never been divulged to him, but the man wasn't stupid. He would know the money for the complete refitting of the Merc's vessel had to have come from somewhere. "You think it's safe to abandon them on Ostalon?"
"If we're going to maroon them, it seems a good place to do it. Assuming they survive, it'll take them months to leave."
"Okay, let's do that." She thought for a moment. "But not until the mission's over. I want Lomang safely confined here in the meantime, out of danger of interfering. I can't stand the sight of the man's hat. It's way too distracting." She spent the next few hours double-checking the supplies and equipment they were taking along on the mission. A plentiful supply of elixir was paramount. Each mage would carry 2 large canisters, and the shuttle would carry a tank of the precious liquid. She had also packed elixir ingredients so they could make more if necessary. She had gathered wood and soil at Martha's Rest. When the data from the probes arrived, it was shocking. No aircraft were plying Ostalon's skies. No ships sailed its seas, and very little traffic travelled along its road systems. Over the cities the atmosphere was hazy, as if smoky from intentional or accidental fires. The planet appeared to have reverted to an early settlement state. Even more pertinent and shocking was the fact that no starships appeared to be in orbit. It was conceivable that one or more could have been orbiting Sunside and thus not visible, but the probes hadn't even picked up traces from starship engines. It seemed no space vessels had been on site for several weeks at a minimum. Could the Dirksons really have abandoned the planet? It was more than she dared to hope.
"I know what the data says, but we should proceed as if the planet and the Dirksen headquarters remain heavily defended.
Agreed.
And, on the chance we've arrived at an opportune moment, but Dirksen's starships are on their way, we should commence the mission as soon as possible.
Also agreed. I'll break the news to the kids. The mages put on their armour in silence. It had been custom-made at Martha's Rest. These were no cut-down Eva suits, potentially with vital components missing. The mages wore the same state-of-the-art, reinforced plexi-silicon as the mercs. It would protect them from direct hits from pulse rounds, though not at close range and not forever. No armour protected you forever. As she also got ready to go into the shuttle, she recalled her argument with Bryce when their anger had visibly hurt Darius. Bryce had implied that what she was trying to do wasn't worth risking her siblings' lives. At the time, she dismissed his words, telling herself she was doing the right thing, the best thing for all of them, that finding the way back to Earth could be the only situation to all their problems. But, in truth, she had to admit that reaching Earth was her dream, not her brothers and sisters'. Everything they did and were about to do was her idea. Though they'd mostly gone along with her, she didn't know if it was because they really wanted to, or if they were doing it out of gratitude for rescuing them from the Shearers, or because they were too submissive or scared to say no. Kids. It was somewhat late in the day to be putting the question to them, but this would be her last opportunity. The mages paused in their movements. She took a breath. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. You can stay on the Duchess. All of you. I can go down to Ostalon by myself.
No!
Darius exclaimed.
I want to come with you, Carina.
I know you don't want me to leave, but that doesn't mean you have to come on this mission with me. I'll be coming back whether I find the coordinates for Earth or not. Her last statement was less certain than she made out, but she didn't want to frighten her brother.
I still want to come with you.
So do I, Parthenia said gravely. This is family business. We have to stick together. That's right, said Fern. You need us. We all need each other if we're going to survive. Oriana said,
We couldn't allow you to do this by yourself. Besides, I want to see where the early mages lived.
Carina was also curious to see the mountain castle. She could be wrong about it being built by mages when the newcomers began to persecute them, but something told her she was right. If only she could ask Jace, the tall, black-bearded Ostalonian native, descendant of those first mages to arrive from Earth. Castiel had said nothing while the others had given their assurances. She still didn't trust him, even as far as she could hoist his scrawny body. He hadn't done anything to draw attention to himself since he'd been threatened with being left behind on the first rehearsal, and the other kids seemed to have forgiven him, if not forgotten his past despicable behaviour. But she had a long memory. She would be keeping a close eye on him. Finally, they were ready. They walked through the Duchess to the shuttle bay. Stevenson would be flying them the remaining distance to Ostalon. The mercs who would accompany them were already boarding. Atoy would be their CO, as they would be out of radio contact with Cadwallader, who was remaining aboard ship. Bryce moved out of line to join the mages and Carina. It would be several hours' travel to Ostalon. Everyone's visor was up, so they breathed the starship's atmosphere and conserved their suits' gases. As she sat down, she noticed Chandu had taken a seat. Her gut rebelled at the thought of the man taking part, but there wasn't anything she could do about it now. It was too late to ask Cadwallader to pick someone else. Chandu turned in her direction. He was sporting a black eye.
What happened to him?
She asked Bryce softly, nodding in the scarred man's direction.
Didn't you hear? He got too familiar with Parthenia.
Anger rose in her, But then she chuckled. She punched him! I guess I shouldn't have worried about the mercs taking advantage of her after all. She opened a private comm to her sister. I forgot to warn you to watch out for Chandu, but it looks like I didn't need to. Parthenia leaned forward to give her a smile. The cabin filled with Stevenson's announcement that the shuttle's hatch was about to close. His co-pilot would be responsible for the Duchess while they were gone. In another few seconds they were sealed in. The rumble and roar of the shuttle's engines firing vibrated through the vessel. They were on their way. Chapter 38. Castiel took the lead as the mercs and mages advanced along dusty mountain tracks toward the Dirksen hideout. Atoy walked directly behind him, followed by most of the mercs. The mages walked to the rear of the group, with a few mercs walking behind them. Nothing moved on the slopes. It was night time, and everyone was relying on night vision. Carina hoped it didn't make too much of a difference to her brother. According to what he'd said, he'd always approached the Dirksen headquarters in a skimmer or similar vessel, and usually during the daytime. He'd seemed confident about where to set down in the Duchess's shuttle, however, so she guessed she had to trust his judgment. She'd asked Bryce to stick close to the mages. They needed the additional firepower. They couldn't cast and shoot at the same time. Once they were inside, the two groups would inevitably split up and she would stick with her siblings. If things didn't go their way, she didn't want to be separated from him. As during the rehearsals, Nala remained behind with Stevenson. The mission was simply too dangerous for a 9-year-old with no way to protect herself. As consolation, the pilot had promised to teach her about the shuttle's controls. Not a single sign of the Dirksen's presence had been spotted. Flying down in the cloaked shuttle had given a close-up of the state of things. Everything the vessel picked up confirmed the data from the Duchess's scanners and probes. No electric lights shone in the darkness, and the planet's communication network seemed dead. No signals were passing to or from its satellites. Ostalon was in a dire state. She recalled the young woman, Asher, who had helped her when she was in need. She hoped her short-term friend was doing okay. Fern opened a private comm. "Can't we transport in? Think about it. We don't know what or who is there. If a bunch of people in armour suddenly appear from nowhere and the Dirksens are still in the castle, they'll shoot us to pieces. And where would we transport to? Only Castiel knows exactly where we're going." "Okay, I guess there was probably a good reason." She was gratified to hear his mature response. The days of dealing with whiny kids appeared to be finally passing. The rough mountain path dipped into a hollow and began to rise again, winding its way across the steep slope. What had made it? People or animals? And if it was people, had it been Dirksen troops? The area was so remote it made more sense to fly troops in and out. But perhaps the Dirksens had once stationed lookouts and guards among the peaks. If so, it hadn't done them any good. For their purposes, Ostalon was dead. The Shurers had discovered the Dirksen presence, and their attack had devastated the place, collapsing its infrastructure. The land and people would not recover for a long time. The Dirksens turning up had been the worst thing that could have happened to them. And so it was across the galactic sector. The warring clans exhausted resources, exploited populations, and wreaked havoc wherever they set foot. She recalled the words of Calverley, the high-ranking Shura officer she'd encountered on Ithia, and then again on the Shura flagship Nightfall. He'd opined that the clan's influence brought control and order to chaos, and with them came civilization. Ostalon was testament to his delusion. Atoy raised a hand and the line halted. Castiel conned. "It's around the next bend, I'm sure of it," Atoy said.
"Car, you, me, and the kid should go take a look."
"I'm coming up." She edged past the mercs in the line along the narrow track. When she reached the front, she joined Atoy and Castiel as they walked the final few meters. At the sharp edge of the protruding slope, Castiel squatted down.
"This is the place the skimmers would turn before heading directly into the mountainside."
He spoke in an unnecessarily soft tone.
Or at least that was how it seemed. In fact, they passed through the illusion and landed in the bay. There were always guards around, but not many.
"Never any outside?" Atoy asked.
"No. I'll send in a fire team, see what they find."
"Wait a minute," Carina said. "I just thought of something." She calmed the whole platoon and her siblings. "There's gonna be some noise. Don't panic." Scanning the canyon, she found a boulder. Then she closed her eyes and sipped elixir. After sending out the transport cast, she opened her eyes. The small shift in the boulder's position was all it needed. The rock fell, bouncing down the canyon wall, scattering stones and vegetation and making enough of a racket to attract the attention of anyone nearby. They waited. No one appeared through the illusory wall Castiel claimed to exist, or from anywhere else. Assured they wouldn't be ambushed, Atoy picked her fire team and sent them in. Castiel directed the men and women to an exact location, but when they arrived there, they stood still, looking around as if confused. "Castiel," said Carina, "you're going to have to find the wall yourself. I'll come with you.
But if Zabel or Key see me, they'll recognize me immediately."
"Your visor is down, dummy." Castiel still seemed reluctant, but he got up. Atoy waited with the remaining mercs while he and Carina walked down to the supposed opening to the mountain castle. When she arrived, she could see the source of the fire team's confusion. The division between the real mountain and the illusion was invisible to the unknowing eye. Even Castiel couldn't find it at first. He moved sideways, pressing his hands to the upright surface as the trail faded away, leaving nothing except vertical slope and a deep drop to rocks below. Then his arm slipped into nothingness.
"It's here! I found it! I told you it was here!"
The invisible entrance was almost impossible to walk through. It was easy to understand why the Dirksons had used skimmers to enter and leave the headquarters. Only a tiny fragment of path remained at the edge of the illusion. They were already down to single file. In order to go into the headquarters, they would have to walk on tiptoes. "Is it solid floor once you're through?"
"Yeah, we'll enter into a large bay."
"All right, go around me. I'll go in first, followed by the fire team. You return to Atoy and the others." Castiel didn't need to be told twice. He ran up the slope and disappeared around the rocky protrusion. She lifted her pulse rifle and stepped into rock. Chapter 39. The entrance to the mountain castle rose 4 or 5 stories high and was wide enough to hold 5 or 6 skimmers. The marks of that many vehicles were plain to see on the rock floor. The place had clearly been created and hadn't formed naturally, though no impressions of cutting tools or drills scarred the surface. She couldn't imagine what had carved the chamber. The walls were smooth and polished, like the pebbles Nini used to make, the stone highlighted with subtle colours and grains. She guessed that at the time the chamber had been created, the walls had been beautiful. Now the dust of ages overlaid them, and skimmer exhaust had burned the floor. The illusion was maintained on the inside, where in the space the skimmers would enter, an interior wall appeared to rise to the ceiling. On closer inspection, she realized the patterning was a facsimile of the right-hand wall. At the rear of the chamber stood an arched doorway from which no light shone. The fire team stepped through the wall behind her. She gestured to them to halt and increased her external mic to maximum, but all she could hear was the movement of the night air. She walked with the fire team to the far side of the cavern, where an unlit passage led upward. She calmed Atoy. "The place seems deserted. I think it's safe to bring everyone in." Was she really standing in an underground castle created by mages thousands of years ago? It was too early to tell, but the thought sent her heart into her throat. One by one, mercs stepped through the illusory wall into the skimmer bay. Had the mages even used air transport to reach the place? It seemed unlikely. The mages would have transported into and out of it. The trail that petered out at the edge of the entrance would have been only an emergency measure. Atoy walked up to Carina. "I'll send out teams to search the place. You said they should look for paper documents containing star maps, strange writing, that kind of thing, right? Or anything else that seems odd, I guess." It was hard to give clear instructions when she didn't know what she was looking for herself. "If the worst comes to the worst and we don't find what you need, we might find some Dirksen intel we can sell to the Shurers. I can't imagine they would have been too careful about clearing such a well-hidden site." As Atoy began to divide up and instruct her soldiers, the mages and Bryce appeared through the cavern wall, followed by the remainder of the mercs. The children seemed impressed, standing still and gazing at the ceilings and walls. She calmed, "Hey, we have a job to do, don't forget. We need to focus." She worried it was mean to hurry them. She knew how they felt. When you grew up differently from everyone around you, separated and cut off from regular life and the dominant culture, to suddenly find yourself in the home of your ancestors, a place where you would have belonged, was an amazing feeling. But the mountain castle had also been the Dirksen headquarters on Ostalon. It would never be safe for them to linger here. Atoy's teams were running up the passage. When the kids joined Carina near the doorway, she told them to wait while the mercs checked the interior was as empty as it seemed. After several minutes, Atoy said, "Car, from the reports I'm getting, this place is huge. Do you want to wait while we check it top to bottom, or start searching it yourselves now?" "I don't want to hang around. We'll begin our search." As she led the children up the passage, she said, "Castiel, are you absolutely sure you don't have any idea where something secret might be hidden?" "I already told you I don't remember anything like that. All I know is that older parts of the castle are different from the areas the Dirksens built." They emerged into a second large chamber, about 4 times the size of the one at the entrance. "This is the Great Hall." The temperature on Carina's HUD suddenly dropped. "Whoa," said Oriana. "It's really cold in here." "Yes, it always was," Castiel said. A blackened fireplace stood in one corner, and next to it a comfortably padded armchair and a small 3-legged table. The rest of the hall was empty. "How many floors did you say are here?" asked Carina. "I didn't. Lots, though." "Are there any below this one?" "Yes, but the Dirksens built it. That's where they put their prisoners." "We aren't going to find anything the mages may have left down there. This seems to be the hub. The mages may have created a secret safe somewhere in here. Let's start by examining these walls." It occurred to her that mages wouldn't have needed to install a lock or any external device to open a secret repository. All they would have required was the knowledge of where something was located. They would have been able to transport the item in and out. "Look for a pattern or carving on the walls that might indicate something is behind it." She jogged to the farthest wall and inspected the surface. Like in the entrance chamber, it was smooth. She couldn't imagine what had created the effect. Perhaps the mages of olden times had known more casts. The patterning seemed natural, arising from the rock of the mountain itself. and she couldn't see any irregularity in the smoothness that would indicate carving. She moved quickly along the wall, scanning it and running her hand over it to feel for something she might not see. The children and Bryce were doing the same, but the hall was huge. It would take them a while to check all the parts they could get to, but most of the height of the towering walls was unreachable. And the hall was only one part of the castle. A sense of fear and defeat began to grow in her. The task she had set seemed hopeless. Even if her guess that the mages had left something behind was correct, it might take them years to find it. Atoy ran back into the hall and crossed to Carina. "What's happening?"
"I think the Dirksons may have left some prisoners behind."
"You're kidding."
"Come and see for yourself."
Carina told the others to keep looking, and if they didn't find anything, to try the next level up if it had been declared safe. Then she went after Atoy, who had disappeared through one of the hall's openings. The woman waited next to an elevator. They went down together. When the elevator doors opened, 3 mercs stood in a narrow hallway. The air was hazy, and her HUD told her it contained products of combustion. Opened steel doors ran across the passage, but the doors in the walls were sealed. Faint thumping and cries came from within.
"Can't get the door open, Captain," said one of the mercs to Atoy. "Tried everything. Can't even blast them. The material's too tough."
"Where are the sounds coming from?" The man indicated a door. She sipped elixir and cast unlock. A metallic click followed, and the door swung ajar. "Food," said a frail voice. "I need food." The merc opened the door. Inside the cell, an old man lay on the floor. His body was skeletal, the skin stretched over bones that barely held scraps of flesh. His eyes stared from round, hollow sockets. Despite his terrible state, he looked faintly familiar. "Are you sure?" the man asked. "Did we win?" A bolt struck her as she finally recognized him. "Calverley?" she blurted. "I am Admiral Calverley. Who are you?" In answer, she lifted her visor. His features remained confused.
"How long have you been here?"
asked Atoy. "I don't know. Weeks. There is water here, but no food. That bitch Sable Dirksen left us to starve." "Us?" Carina asked. "There are more of you?" "At least one more, but I think he's dead." She stepped out of the cell and cast unlock on the remaining doors. In the cell next to Calverley's lay another man. He must have once been large. He was very tall, but the weeks of starvation had left him cruelly emaciated. It was the man's thick black beard and hair, now streaked with white, that clued her in. Jace. Chapter 40. Carina walked heavily into the hall of the mountain castle. The children were standing in a group with Bryce, their visors up. On seeing her, Parthenia said, "We can't find anything here. We're going up to the next level." "Not just yet. I have some news. When the Dirksons left the castle, they didn't take all their prisoners with them. They left them to die in the cells on the lower level." "How terrible!" Oriana exclaimed. "Those poor people." "Well, one of those poor people is Jace." Seeing Parthenia's face begin to crumple, she added hastily, "He's still alive. The medic is with him now, and another prisoner survived, a Shearer called Calverley. You might remember him from the Nightfall. Both of them are very, very ill." "I want to see Jace," Parthenia said. There was no point in trying to stop her. Parthenia had formed a special connection with the ranger after he'd helped her and Darius when they first arrived on Ostalon. "Go ahead," Carina said, "but I warn you, he's almost unrecognizable." Parthenia quickly stepped over to the opening and through it. "Shit," said Atoy overcome. She thought the Merc captain was going to report that Jace had died, but instead Atoy went on to say,
Stevenson's just reported he saw 5 skimmers heading this way.
5? Stars! It's the Dirksons! It has to be! Nothing else on Ostalon is moving.
I know. What do you say? Do you want us to evacuate or defend?
The trail away from here is open to the sky, so they'll see us if we leave. We won't have time to get under cover. There's no time to transport everyone out either. She had another reason for staying. Someone among the Dirkson party might know something about ancient documents that had been found here.
So we stay and engage them. I was hoping you'd say that. I want a chance to face the people who did this. I'll bring everyone down to the hall and we'll give the Dirkson troops a nice surprise. You get the kids away from the battle.
No, we can help.
Up to you,
said Atoy stiffly. She closed the comm. The Dirksons are coming, Carina told the children. 5 skimmers are on their way. They're coming here, Oriana exclaimed. What are we going to do? Carina will protect us, said Darius.
Even she can't protect you from 5 skimmers full of Dirkson troops,
Bryce said.
What do we do, Carina?
We should station ourselves in that corner, she replied, pointing. It isn't visible from the door. Mercs began to pour into the hall. Atoy emerged from the basement and her soldiers lined up along the walls each side of the entrance. Darius, Carina said, do you remember when you helped me at the mech battle? Can you do the same again? Can you transport the Dirkson soldiers hundreds of kilometers away? I'd love to do that. Excellent. The rest of us can do the same. Even if we can't transport them as far, we should be able to prevent them from returning to the battle in time to be of any help. But wait until I give the signal. They all nodded. Okay, lower your visors.
The skimmers are arriving in the bay car,
said Atoy. Copy. Carina said to the children, remember to stay well back and let the black dogs do their work. Don't transport any of them by mistake, okay? She gasped.
What's wrong?
Bryce asked. Parthenia's still in the cells on the lower level. She looked over to the doorway that led to the elevator. It was opposite the hall's entrance. If Parthenia tried to join them, she would be seen by the Dirksons and give the game away. She'll have to stay there until the battle's over, she said resignedly. A man in soldier's uniform but helmetless walked casually into the hall. His arms relaxed as he held his rifle with the muzzle down. Behind him strode a woman dressed in a simple black silver-edged pantsuit. Her dark brown hair was pulled tightly back in a bun. On each side of her and trailing her slightly were 2 more helmetless soldiers. A 4th soldier brought up the rear. None of the group noticed the mercs or mages spread out in their peripheral vision. Atoy was apparently waiting until the Dirksons realized they'd walked into a trap before springing it.
Carina, Atoy,
said Stevenson over comm.
Cadwallader's just told me a corvette has arrived from out system and is heading toward Ostalon.
Must be a taxi for the bitch, Atoy said. More soldiers walked into the hallway. Carina couldn't believe none of them saw the lines of people in armour stretched out on both sides. How couldn't they feel the tension stretching the air so tight she could almost strum it? The dark-haired woman was heading for the exit that led to the lower level. Carina couldn't let her go down there, where maybe only one merc and the medic could defend Parthenia. But before she could say anything, there was movement at her side. Castiel was striding forward, his visor and arms raised.
Sable, watch out! It's an ambush!
Sable Dirkson whirled to see where the voice had come from. Her mouth stretched wide in shock as her eyes took in the sight of a platoon of enemy soldiers. The mercs began firing. Castiel turned and raised his weapon, aiming it at Darius. Bryce shot the dark mage in the stomach and he doubled over, dropping to his knees and then toppling to the floor. He lay still. Bryce ran up to the boy and kicked his body out of the way. Dirkson's soldiers flooded into the hall. "Darius! Everyone!" Carina shouted. "Start casting!" Sable Dirkson was backing away from the fighting, her guard protecting her. "Don't transport the woman in black," Carina instructed her siblings. Though removing their leader might encourage the Dirkson soldiers to surrender, if anyone knew where Mage documents were, it was Sable. Mercs were falling, hit by close-range fire. It was typical that the Dirksons would have the latest weaponry, effective against the latest armor. But Dirkson troops were falling too, and simply disappearing as the mages transported them away. They were the lucky ones. Sable was nearing the exit to the lower level. Leaving Bryce to protect the children, Carina ran around the edge of the room. A pulse round hit her, but only obliquely, skittering over her shoulders. She felt a flash of heat, then it was gone. The hiss of pulse fire, thuds of boots on stone, clack of weapons on armor, and cries of wounded Dirkson soldiers echoed from the high-vaulted ceiling. The mercs seemed to be winning, but it was hard to tell. She didn't know how many soldiers had yet to enter the hall. One of Sable's guard had seen Carina coming. The woman turned her focus from the mercs to the approaching threat. Carina fired on her before she could shoot, hitting her in the face. The soldier fell, her head a mess of smouldering flesh and bone. Sable's wide-eyed gaze fixed on Carina. She pushed the back of another of her guards, drawing his attention. He swept around, but as he was about to fire, he disappeared, transported by one of the kids. 2 down, 2 to go. The sounds of battle seemed to be lessening. Another of Sable's guard disappeared. The woman ran for the exit. Carina switched her weapon to stun and shot the Dirkson leader in the back. The remaining guard fired, hitting Carina's thigh. Searing heat erupted from the muscle. She fired back. Her shot went wide, but a pulse from another direction hit the man's chest. He collapsed, falling backward onto prone, unconscious Sable Dirkson. Chapter 41. Carina slid to the floor, the pain from her thigh felling her. Her suit's medkit kicked into action, and she felt the pressure of an air injector against her skin. An icy sensation spread from the injection site, first dulling and then entirely numbing the pain. She exhaled. The shooting had stopped. What Dirkson soldiers remained were motionless on the floor, either dead or incapacitated. The mercs were moving among them, removing their weapons and checking their statuses. She got to her feet. Her injured leg felt weak, but she walked over to Sable Dirkson, who lay face downward beneath her dead guard. "You okay, Car?" asked Atoy as she approached. "I'll heal myself in a minute." "Did you kill her?" Atoy gestured at the prone Dirkson leader. "She's only stunned. I want to find out what she knows about this place." Atoy paused a moment as if listening to a comm. "One of the skimmers either didn't arrive or left after the battle started. Only 4 are in the bay. Maybe some Dirkson troops decided their leader wasn't worth fighting for. Carina would never have fought for Sable Dirkson either, not after she had tried to massacre thousands of innocent mages. Or they left to wait for reinforcements. I guess there might be more troops on Ostalon. That corvette must be coming to take the majority off planet with her. Imagine being so scared of reprisals you take a whole platoon with you wherever you go. The Dirksons sure have a lot to answer for. Before they came along, Ostalon was doing okay. Now the place is a wasteland. I doubt any Ostalonian would hesitate to slit her throat if they got the chance. We'd better not hang around too long. The Dirksons will try to mount a rescue." Carina walked closer to Sable and tried to move the dead officer off her. Seeing her struggle, Atoy stepped up and helped her roll the corpse away. Sable appeared to be coming around. The sound of running feet distracted Carina. A figure in Merc's armor was racing across the hall. The person was too small to be a mercenary. After puzzling over it briefly, she realized it was Castiel. She'd thought Bryce had killed him, and she hadn't shed any tears about it. She lifted her weapon and aimed, but before she could get off a shot, the boy had disappeared through an opening. Damn it! Send some people after him, Atoy. She wished Bryce had removed the thorn that had been stuck in her side for so long. Now she would have to figure out what to do with the little traitor. Again, had he really imagined the Dirksons would win against the Black Dogs, and that Sable Dirkson would be grateful? The boy had even bigger delusions of grandeur than his father. Bryce walked up, the children trailing him. I know. I just couldn't kill a kid.
Castiel is bad, Darius said. I hate him so much, said Oriana.
Sable Dirkson groaned. She tried to turn onto her back and failed. Let me help you, Carina offered sweetly. She slid her booted foot under the woman's torso and flipped her over. Then she rested the end of her rifle's muzzle against Sable's forehead. The Dirkson leader's eyes narrowed and focused. Then she groaned again, turned her face to one side and vomited. Pleased to meet you too, Carina said. Gross, said Fern. Sable wiped her mouth on her sleeve.
Can I at least sit up?
Carina eased the pressure of her weapon and gave a nod. Though as Sable drew herself into a sitting position, the muzzle was never far from her face.
You must be Carina Scherer.
My name isn't your business. She didn't bother to correct the woman's error. You're alive for one reason. I'm looking for something here. If you can tell me where it is, maybe I'll only lock you in one of your cells with the corpse of a prisoner you left to starve. One of your officers might think to look for you there.
You make it sound so inviting. Perhaps I would rather die than endure that, or help you.
No, you wouldn't. Cowards always cling to life, no matter how many people have to die for them or what dishonourable things they must do. You'll do anything to live. Sable swallowed, and her gaze slid from Carina's to take in the state of things in the hall. Perhaps she was hoping to see some of her soldiers still standing, giving her a chance of reversing the situation in her favour. Or perhaps she was counting them, wondering if some had gotten away and might come to her rescue. Carina thrust her muzzle into Sable's skull, causing her head to jerk backward. I'm looking for documents, ancient papers, or anything else that was here when you arrived.
Ancient papers?
Sable hesitated. What is it? Tell me.
There is a room.
Sable looked as though she had tasted bile.
We call it the Star Tower. There might be something in there.
Show me. Atoy hauled the Dirkson leader to her feet.
Move fast.
She pushed the leader forward. The woman had no choice but to walk quickly with Atoy's gun in her back. Carina, Bryce and the mages followed. The mercs remained in the hall, tending to their wounded and corralling the Dirkson wounded who could still walk toward the prisoner cells. Sable took them up many floors to the top of the castle. They stepped out of the elevator into a chill breeze and starlit sky. They were inside a tower with arched glassless windows looking out over the mountains, their peaks glowing softly in the starlight. Low seating ran around the edge of the room, which was topped by an octagonal roof.
You'll have to be quick, said Sable sullenly. The effect disappears at dawn.
What are you talking about?
This is hollow.
Sable kicked the solid wall that ran down from the edge of the seating.
I think something's hidden inside, but it's impossible to open. I guess it's something to do with the stars, but I could never create the right pattern. There are too many possibilities, even for a computer to generate.
Carina knelt down in front of the panel Sable had kicked. It was hard to see in the minimal light, but she thought she could make out some faint lines. As she peered at them more closely, her heart leapt. It was a character, though one she didn't recognize. She'd been right all along. Mages had lived here. Her ancestors had stood where she was kneeling. The thought brought a lump to her throat, but she had no time to indulge her feelings. The Dirksen woman had said something about having to hurry and star patterns. However, Sable Dirksen was not a mage. Carina sipped elixir, closed her eyes, and cast Unlock. She opened her eyes and touched the character. The section beneath the seat didn't move, and the lines around its periphery remained thin. She stood up. "What do you mean about the stars?" Sable began to lift an arm. "Hey," said Atoy. "Do you want me to show you or not?" Sable asked acidly. "Let her move," Carina told her friend. Sable reached up and tapped the air above her head with a finger. A point of light appeared. Like a tiny star, it hung in the dark space below the tower roof. She touched the air in another place, and a second star came to life. "It only happens at night," said Sable. "As soon as the sun rises, the stars disappear." "I know what it is," said Oriana excitedly. "It's the star map." Carina had realized it immediately too, but the realization filled her with dread. The star map was the hardest part of the mage's meditation ritual. Nine had taught it rigorously, forcing her to draw it on hollow scribe over and over again. If she made one mistake, she had to start again from the beginning. As a young child, she'd fallen asleep trying to draw the star map correctly and dreamt about being lost in it, unable to find Ma or Ba or her way home. My way home. If she could draw the star map correctly, it might unlock the door and reveal secrets that lay inside, perhaps even the route back to Earth. But only if she got it right. How many times had she wondered if the map had been corrupted over the centuries and generations of mages, passing it on from memory alone?
"Carina," urged Bryce, "you have to do it quickly."
Outside the tower, the real stars were beginning to fade in the pre-dawn light. 100 star positions from memory? Swallowing her fear that she would get it wrong, or that the map she'd learned with so much effort and anguish was incorrect to start with, she began. She swiped the stars Sable had created, leaving a blank canvas. As always, she began from the center. The central patterns were burned into her mind like the most painful moments of her life, like the time she finally accepted her parents were never coming home, and the moment Nine took her last breath. When the center was complete, she moved to the right quadrant at the rear of the 3D map. Nine had taught her tricks to help her remember. This set looks like a scalobite tail, and they join to this set via a winding trail like a soft noodle. She moved to the next quadrant, conscious of the sky lightening around her. As she worked, old memories of her grandmother surfaced, moments she'd forgotten. The lady had been a fearsome force to reckon with at times, but Carina had felt her love like a thick blanket surrounding her and protecting her always. She started on the third quadrant. These stars were like the spots on a crucan's wings, and these were regular, like the windows of a 3-story house. She had once asked Nine if they would ever live in a 3-story house. Her grandmother had replied, "Probably not, but we will always be happy." By the time she moved on to the fourth and final quadrant, her face was wet and she could barely see what she was doing. She stopped to wipe her eyes. The edge of the mountain range was turning rosy red and the map was beginning to fade. She hurriedly created the last set of stars. 1 here, another here, 5 to go. She counted them down. She touched the final star to life and fell to her knees, grasping the flat surface under the seat. The door didn't open. She pressed it, then dug her fingernails into the cracks, but it remained firmly closed. "Never mind," said Darius. "You tried." She leapt up. She'd gotten something wrong. She knew it. If only she could remember. Then she saw it. The final 5 stars were reversed. She'd created a mirror image of their true position. She swept her hand through them. Beyond the space that had held the erased stars, she saw a brightness on the horizon that heralded the sun's approach. Her hand trembling, she recreated the final 5 stars. "It's opening!" shouted Oriana. But before Carina could turn to see what lay beyond the door, Sable drove her elbow into Atoy's stomach. The merc's armour protected her from actual injury, but the distraction gave Sable the chance she needed. She ripped Atoy's weapon from her hands and fired at the group of mages. The pulse hit Darius. Carina screamed and launched herself at Sable. Atoy was already on the woman, knocking her to the ground and wresting the weapon from her. Carina knelt on her chest and grabbed Sable's throat with both hands. "Don't kill her," warned Atoy. Carina took no notice. Sable was turning purple. "Car," barked Atoy. "Let go. We need her." With all her strength, Carina squeezed tighter. "Don't make me do it, Car." She felt cold, hard metal against her skull. The red haze masking her vision began to fade. The noises and sights of her surroundings flooded in. "He's still alive," she heard Oriana say. "I'll heal him." Somehow Carina managed to loosen her grip. Sable coughed and writhed, trying to get her hands up. "One of you take whatever's inside that cubbyhole," said Atoy. "We have to get back to the shuttle."
Chapter 42.
"I haven't heard from Stevenson for a while," Atoy said as they ran down the castle stairs. "And he isn't answering comms. The last thing he said was he could see the 5th skimmer that got away. Then nothing." Carina could hardly make sense of what the woman was saying. All she could think about was Darius. She was carrying the little boy over her shoulder as they ran. Darius, her sweet little brother, who she was supposed to protect and keep safe. And he'd been shot right in the stomach by that Dirksen bitch. It was her fault. Her fault for taking him into danger. The armful of documents Fern was carrying, the treasure she had worked so hard and risked so much for, meant nothing compared to Darius's life. Nothing was worth attaining if it meant she had to lose him. "Car," said Atoy, "I need you to keep it together." She hated her friend right now, but she knew she was right. "The mages can transport the platoon to the shuttle. I'm worried about that corvette. I want to take the bitch with us." She was gripping Sable Dirksen tightly by her upper arm and partly forcing, partly dragging her down the stairs. "No, the cells." Carina could imagine worse and more suitable fates for the Dirksen leader than starving to death, but she didn't have time to enact them. "We can use her as hostage for safe passage out of the system." Through her fog of rage, misery and guilt, Carina could see the sense of what Atoy was saying. The shuttle had little in the way of defensive weaponry. It relied on the Duchess for its defense, but the Merc starship was currently on the far side of a gas giant. "All right, but I want to be the one who kills her when this is done. Just wait until we're aboard the Duchess. Then I certainly won't stand in your way." The Mercs were waiting in the great hall. Parthenia was there too. She gasped at the sight of Darius over Carina's shoulder. "He's just hurt," Oriana assured her sister. "I cast heal on him, and so did Fern. We can all carry on casting until we get him to the Duchess's sickbay." The girl's tone sounded hopeful, but heal wouldn't prevent death, only forestall it in decreasing increments until the cast had no effect whatsoever.
Only spirit mages could prevent someone from dying, and then only at great cost to themselves, usually their own life. The little boy hadn't moved at all since Sable had shot him. Carina would never forgive herself for allowing him to be hurt, and if he died, she wouldn't want to go on living. Jason Calverley lay on the floor of the hall. Jace remained unconscious, though Calverley seemed coherent, but only barely. Loath though she was to take Calverley with them, her conscience weighed heavily enough without also leaving an old, starved man to die alone. "Do you know where Castiel is?" she asked Parthenia. "No one can find him. I can't believe that after we'd forgiven him for so much, he still betrayed us. I hate it, but we'll have to leave him here. You take Darius to the shuttle. Fern, Oriana and I can transport everyone else. Then we'll come ourselves."
"I'll stay with them,"
offered Bryce. Carina was in no state to argue. On top of everything, she was also concerned about Stevenson's silence. "Okay, I'll transport myself and Darius. Send Atoy and as many mercs as you can manage with me." The black dogs were carrying their own weapons as well as those they'd taken from the dead and wounded Dirksen troops. Carina cradled hers under her right arm as she balanced her brother on her left shoulder. Atoy stood beside her, her grip tight on Sable Dirksen. Carina cast. A moment later she was standing outside the shuttle. The sun was coming up over the peak of a mountain, and someone was screaming. Atoy and Sable Dirksen appeared.
"What the hell is that?"
Atoy asked. 6 mercs materialized in a group. Carina recognized the person who was screaming. "Nala? No!" The shuttle's ramp was up. She raced around to the pilot's hatch. Scorch marks ran down from the roof of the pilot's section. The shuttle had been attacked. The departing Dirksen soldiers in the skimmer must have spotted it and fired. Nala's screaming was an endless horror reverberating around Carina's head. She had to get into the shuttle, but the hatch was closed. Only Stevenson could open it from the inside.
"The manual's here,"
said a voice. A merc had arrived. The man felt the undercarriage and popped a latch. The next second, the hatch opened. The rising sun's red beam slanted in from holes burned in the roof. Stevenson sprawled in his seat, utterly still. It had been quick, from the look of him. Nala was hysterical. "I'll get her," said the merc. But as he approached, the girl screamed even louder and fought to get away. She tore at her harness, trying to unfasten it but not succeeding. The soldier retreated, shaking his head.
"I'll hold the boy if you want to try."
Carina passed her brother over to the man and then climbed in. "Nala," she said, her voice thick. "It's me, Carina. It's okay. No one's going to hurt you." Nala's wildly staring eyes focused on her, and some semblance of recognition appeared in them. When Carina got nearer to her, she stopped struggling. She allowed her big sister to undo her harness and lift her from her seat. Her screams grew quieter. As Carina carried her down, they stopped altogether, and she began to sob. "It's okay." She held Nala tightly. "It's going to be okay." But they were just words. She had no idea how they were going to make it back to the Duchess alive. More mercs had appeared. The news that the pilot was dead was spreading, and concern and grief were rising among the soldiers.
"Shit,"
said Atoy when she saw Stevenson.
"Why'd the bastards have to do that?"
The answer was obvious. The Dirksen skimmer hadn't possessed the firepower to destroy the shuttle. The attackers had hoped that by killing the pilot, they would prevent the mercs from leaving. But Atoy wasn't speaking from a place of logic. Carina could barely think either. She had to get Darius back to the Duchess, whatever it took. "I'll fly it."
"You? Do you know how?"
Parthenia, Bryce, Fern and Oriana arrived. Everyone had returned from the ancient mage's castle. Yes, she replied with determination. I can fly it well enough to get us out of here.
But the cabin won't hold atmosphere.
I'll breathe my suits. Parthenia had walked up. Nala, come with me. Carina needs space so she can help us. The little girl allowed Parthenia to take her away. Bryce took Darius from the merc's arms. Just, Carina said to Atoy. She swallowed and her chin trembled. Just help me get him down. Her eyes wet, Atoy nodded. Together they undid Stevenson's harness and lifted the man's body out of his seat. They laid him down on the mountainside. Then Carina climbed into the cab again and opened the shuttle's ramp. Pairs of mercs carried Jace and Calverley inside first. Another pair entered with Sable Dirksen. Wounded mercs followed, Bryce and the children went in, and then the remaining soldiers. Her heart breaking, Carina took Stevenson's shoulders while Atoy took his legs. They carried him into the shuttle and placed him in the well between the benches. She had seen dead soldiers there before, as the mercs carried them back to the Duchess for a proper ceremony before they were committed to the void. But she had never once imagined that Stevenson would be one of them. Chapter 43. When Carina had confidently asserted she could fly the shuttle, she hadn't known if the Dirksen attack had damaged its controls. She climbed into the pilot's cabin and Stevenson's seat, immediately closing her visor against the smell of death. Then she closed the pilot's hatch. The sun's rays shining through the holes in the cabin roof were growing brighter. The realization that Stevenson would never see another sunrise popped into her mind. She choked and forced the thought away. She had to focus on getting Darius and everyone else back to the Duchess. She gave a warning to her passengers and then lifted the ramp and closed the airlock before running through flight checks. Nothing seemed damaged. The thick casing over the control center seemed to have protected it from the skimmer's fire. She started the engine. Her chest heaved. Blinking away tears, she flew the shuttle up, piling on as much speed as she dared with sick passengers. Then she calmed the Duchess, briefly informing Cadwallader about their situation, Stevenson's death, and the 3 new arrivals. She omitted that one of the Dirksen's ex-prisoners was a Shura. There would be time to explain later, providing they made it. At the end of the comm, she reiterated the need to have the sickbay ready to treat Darius upon his arrival. Ostalon's pale blue sky faded to black, and the forces acting upon her body eased somewhat. Her HUD signalled the rapid drop in atmospheric gases and temperature. As silence pressed in on her, she felt suddenly, dreadfully alone. She commed Atoy. "What's happening back there?"
"Everyone's fine. Your Sibs are doing that thing with your brother, and the little girl stopped crying, I think. It's hard to tell with her face behind her visor, but she's sitting still now. Poor Nala." She didn't even want to imagine what her sister had been through, trapped next to a dead man. She would need psychological help. Her entire family needed psychological help.
"Any sign of the corvette?"
Atoy asked. Shit! She'd forgotten about the Dirksen vessel. She brought up the scan data. "I can't see it. Maybe it's around the other side of the planet."
"Funny, the troops who got away would have been in contact with it."
"One would think." She closed the comm. Bryce reached out.
"Hey, how are you holding up?"
"I've had better days. In fact, nearly all of them were better than this one."
"You'll get through it. We all will. We only need to get back to the Duchess."
"Easier said than done. There's a Dirksen corvette out there somewhere, but the scanners aren't picking it up."
"Well, that certainly puts a downer on things."
"If I can think of something to cheer you up, I'll let you know."
"Take it easy."
A pause stretched out between them. He said softly,
"I love you."
"I love you too." The words came easily. though it was the first time they'd said them to each other. An alert sounded, and an incoming comm from the Duchess flashed up on the flight console.
"We're coming out to meet you," said Cadwallader. "It'll bring forward your ETA, and you might need our firepower. The Dirksen corvette is coming toward you with the sun at its back, probably scrambling the data your scanners are picking up."
Damn it! She checked the data again. There was an anomaly in the readings in the direction of Ostalon's star, but the shuttle's system hadn't flagged it as a ship. She warned the passengers she was going to increase speed. Atoy's plan to use Sable Dirksen as a hostage was sound, but they couldn't tell the Dirksen forces too soon. Until the shuttle came under the protection of the Duchess, the enemy would be able to board her and rescue their leader. If she could just make it within the range of the Duchess's weapons, they would be safe. After its recent refit, she was confident the Merc ship outgunned the little corvette. The additional acceleration forced her into her seat. She hated to think what it might be doing to her passengers, but if they didn't get away from the corvette, they would all be dead anyway. A hail arrived. With no other starships in the vicinity, there could be no doubt where it came from. She ignored it, buying time, glad that whoever was in command wanted to speak before firing. Did they suspect Sable might be aboard? The hail sounded again. She coaxed a smidgen more acceleration from the shuttle's engine. The scanners finally picked up the corvette. The flight console announced its presence. "Gee, thanks," she muttered. The kilometers between the shuttle and the Duchess melted away. A third hail sounded. She gritted her teeth. Aboard the corvette, patience would be wearing thin. Whoever commanded the vessel wouldn't wait much longer. A clanging alert rang. The shuttle was under attack. The corvette had fired. A pulse was streaming across space toward them. Shit! This was it! All it would take to finish them was one direct hit. Her muscles turned rigid, but nothing happened. The shuttle flew on. The corvette's pulse had missed, but that seemed an unlikely accident. It had been a warning shot. "Where's the Duchess?" She sought out the Merc ship. As she spotted the vessel, it fired, but the distance was too great. The energy would dissipate before it reached the corvette, having little effect. It was time to go to the next stalling tactic. She opened the hail.
"This is Commander Key of the Tumult to the Starship Shuttle departing Ostalon. Reverse thrust immediately and prepare to be boarded."
She responded, "This is the shuttle departing Ostalon. Under whose authority do you command us?"
"Under the authority of the Dirksens."
She'd heard the man's voice before, but she couldn't remember where. She hadn't met many Dirksens, only Rhys and his awful mother Langley. "Really?" she said in a mocking tone. "I have it on good authority we shouldn't stop."
"Reverse thrust immediately, or we will fire."
The man sounded unusually calm given the circumstances. She placed him. Commander Key was the dark-eyed, shaven-headed officer who had taken her prisoner when she first arrived on Ostalon. He was smart and effective. She would have to be careful. The Duchess was nearly within range, just another few minutes. "Go ahead, but you're going to get in one hell of a lot of trouble."
"You're that Scherer girl. Or, no, not a Scherer. You were working for them as a merc. Makes sense. You have 10 seconds to slow, or we will fire."
"So you aren't too fond of your precious leader?" A long pause. She counted down from 10. She got to 3 before Key answered.
"Is Sable Dirksen aboard your vessel?"
"She is. We'd rather not have her, though."
"I want proof."
"You mean a finger or something?"
"I want to speak to her."
She checked the time remaining until they reached the Duchess's protection. "Atoy," she said in a private comm, "the commander of the corvette wants to speak to the bitch. I'm going to put us all on a 4-way comm. If she refuses to talk, encourage her." Once the group comm was initiated, she addressed the Dirksen commander. "Okay, she can hear you."
"Ma'am, I need to verify your presence aboard the Shura shuttle."
"Yes, I'm here," Sable replied through gritted teeth. Carina smirked, "Still clinging on to your life. If you fire on us, Key, you'll be putting her life in danger." The commander didn't respond. She checked the time again. They were nearly safe. It was almost over. The tumult fired. She tensed. Had Key decided to sacrifice Sable? Did he want a chance to be leader himself? But again the pulse sped by the shuttle. She checked its trajectory. It was heading for the Duchess. Key's plan must be to defeat the Merc starship and prevent the shuttle from reaching a safe haven. The two starships were in range, so she altered course. A stray pulse could destroy the shuttle. The Duchess's 4 cannons returned fire.
"What's happening, Car?"
Atoy asked. "The boys are fighting it out."
"But our boy's bigger."
"You betcha." The Duchess scored 2 direct hits on the corvette, but at the edge of her range the effect wasn't devastating. The tumult's pulse had also hit, with similarly minimal effect. The tumult and Duchess fired simultaneously. Key's bravery was mildly impressive. Or was he only foolhardy? The corvette would never defeat the largest ship. The Duchess's pulses impacted the nose of the tumult, sending the ship veering off course. The Duchess also received a hit, but sustained no obvious damage. Surely Key will give up now? But the corvette came around as if to continue the battle. Madness! Then the vessel slowed, continued on her circular path, and flew away. Key had finally come to his senses. She exhaled heavily and then guided the shuttle home. Chapter 44. As soon as it was safe to leave the shuttle, Carina leapt out of the pilot's hatch and ran to the back of the vessel, where the ramp was still lowering. Bryce emerged first, carrying Darius in his arms. She stopped him, drank a mouthful of elixir, and then cast the most powerful heal on the boy she could muster. Then she grabbed her brother from Bryce's arms and ran to the sick bay. The door was open and the medics were waiting. She laid Darius down on the examining table and began to remove his armor. "Let us do it," said one of the medics. "Out of the way!" She backed off, her arms wrapped around her chest, every muscle and fiber tense as she watched the woman and man work. Darius's eyes were closed and his little chest rose and fell. She told herself it was a good sign, that he would live, but she didn't dare to really believe it. Hands touched her shoulders, Bryce's. Then they rose to the clasps on her helmet. She'd forgotten to take it off. When he'd removed her helmet and put it down, he wrapped his arms around her.
"I think he's going to be okay. He's small, but he's strong."
The door to the sick bay opened and Parthenia, Oriana and Fern came in, their faces ghostly white as they took in the sight of Darius's injuries. "Right," said the female medic. "That's it. Everyone out. This isn't a performance." Bryce pulled her out of the room last. The sick bay doors closed behind them. "Where's Nala?" she asked.
"Atoy's bringing her. Her case isn't so urgent, but I think she'll take longer to heal."
Stars, that poor girl. The mission's events were catching up with her. The starving prisoners, Sable Dirksen shooting Darius, Stevenson's death. She began to shake. Bryce's arms tightened around her. "We had a look at the stuff we found at the Mage castle," said Fern. "It's cool." Parthenia put her hand on her arm. "We saw a set of coordinates. We think you found the way, Carina." But it didn't matter anymore. She didn't want to go to Earth. All she wanted was for her brother to not die. Cadwallader walked up to the group.
"What's the situation with the little lad?" "They're still working on him,"
Bryce replied.
We have the best medics with the best equipment, Cadwallader said. If he can be saved, they'll save him.
Parthenia started to sniff. We shouldn't have been so nice to Castiel. He was pretending all the time, planning on betraying us the first chance he got. I told you we shouldn't trust him, said Fern. I certainly won't trust him again, Parthenia said.
You probably won't get the chance, said Bryce. He won't be getting off Ostalon for a while.
Yes, he will, Oriana said. That corvette will go back for him.
Not any day soon, said Cadwallader. The corvette's sitting on our tail, just out of range of our cannons. Waiting for a chance to get their leader back? Bryce asked. So it appears.
That doesn't matter, said Fern. Darius can cast cloak and... Oh, he looked down. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. When Darius is better, Oriana said carefully, he can cast cloak on the Duchess and we can lose that nasty corvette.
What have you done with Sable Dirksen? Carina asked. She's on her way to the brig, of course, replied Cadwallader. Where did you think I would put her? She can swap stories with Lomang and his twin.
She marched away from the sick bay.
Where are you going, Lin? Cadwallader called out after her.
A pair of mercs guiding an Agrav medibed came round the corner. Jace lay on it, finally awake. His hand lifted slightly at the sight of her, but she didn't acknowledge him. She could talk to him later. She had a task to carry out.
Lin! Came Cadwallader's shout. Answer me!
She broke into a run, worried that Cadwallader would find a way to stop her. She met a second medibed carrying Calverley. He stared at the overhead, deep in thought. She skirted around him and the mercs bringing him to the sick bay. Years of living aboard the Duchess meant she knew her layout well. That was good. Cadwallader was smart. He would guess her intention. She turned down a passageway. The new route to the brig would take her longer, but she would approach it from the other direction, where she wouldn't be expected. She broke into a sweat, though she was hardly panting. Everything that had happened was passing through her mind. Scenes she would never forget as long as she lived. The occasional soldier she passed simply stared at her. Cadwallader hadn't put out a ship-wide comm yet. She still had time. She turned into the final passageway. Ahead lay the brig.
"Hey, Lin,"
said the guard cautiously.
"I'm not supposed to let you in. Cadwallader's orders."
"That's okay. I don't want to go in.
I hate to refuse a fellow merc, but orders.
He sounded relieved. She peered over the man's shoulder. "I know how it is. You don't need to worry." The cell walls in the brig were transparent. In one cell, Lomang sat on a bunk in his hateful hat, talking. His enormous brother sat at his feet like a child listening to a story. In the other cell was Sable Dirksen. Sable stood facing the transparent wall, looking out. She had seen Carina. As their eyes met, the colour drained from her face. "I don't need to go in," Carina explained to the guard. She sipped elixir from the reservoir in her suit and closed her eyes. "Wait, what are you doing?" As she had done since she was a little girl, more times than she could remember, she wrote a character in her mind. With a feeling of joyful relief, she sent it out. "Stop," said the guard. "You aren't supposed to do that." She opened her eyes and smiled. "And yet, I did." She looked at Sable's cell. It was empty. Lomang had stopped talking. He was staring at her, his mouth a dark hole filled with shiny teeth. His younger brother looked puzzled. He stood up and walked to the wall of their cell, peering into Sable's. Sable Dirksen was about 3 meters outside the Duchess's hull. Just 3 meters. But it would make all the difference. Air was forcing its way out of her lungs, bursting through tissue and bone, sinew and vein, to erupt in a bloody, bubbly fountain. Her skin was freezing. The saliva in her mouth was boiling and evaporating into the void. Within minutes, she would be dead. Carina's only regret was that it would be over all too quickly.
"Damn it, Lin!"
Cadwallader yelled as he came running up.
"What the hell do you think you're doing?"
He ran to Sable's cell, looked inside, and then turned back to her.
"You do not have the right to execute prisoners."
She shrugged and walked away.
"The Dirksons already hated us. Now they'll hunt down everyone on this ship. You've signed a death warrant for us all."
She continued to walk. Cadwallader's yelling faded. She wandered, unaware of time passing, not knowing where she was going. Then something snapped. She found she couldn't move any farther. When Bryce found her, she was sitting against the bulkhead, staring into the middle distance, unable to think, unable to feel. She had a sense that Bryce had been combing her for a while, but she wasn't sure. All she knew was that she had killed Sable Dirkson in cold blood, and that she had enjoyed it. He squatted down.
"Carina, why didn't you answer me?"
She could only look at him.
"I wanted to tell you the good news. Darius is going to be okay."
The dam broke. She collapsed into his arms. She clung to him for a long time. She didn't know how long. Eventually, she found she could speak again. "What am I, Bryce? What have I become?" The end. This has been Mercenary Mage, Star Mage Saga Book 4, written and narrated by J.J. Green. The next book in the Star Mage Saga series is Accursed Space, Star Mage Saga Book 5. For more J.J. Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.